Welcome back, dear listener. Tonight we are going to travel together to a place far, far away in time. A place where the sun rose over a city built on water, a city of stone temples, floating gardens, and quiet canals. A city that, for a brief moment in history, was one of the largest in the entire world. Tonight we are going to spend a day in the Aztec Empire. Not as a tourist, not as a historian reading from a book, but as someone who has just woken up there. Someone who has to live one full day inside that world. And as we walk through this day, slowly, hour by hour, you will begin to understand why most people from our time would not last a single day in that place. So settle in, close your eyes if you wish. Take a slow, gentle breath in, and a slow, gentle breath out. Let the world around you fade. Let the soft sound of my voice carry you back, across the centuries, to a morning long, long ago. It is just before dawn. The year is 1487. The place is Tenochtitlan, the capital of the Mexica people, the heart of what we now call the Aztec Empire. You are lying on a thin reed mat, on the floor of a small low house made of mud brick and stone. There is no pillow, there is no soft mattress, there is only the mat, a rough woven blanket, and the quiet even breathing of other people sleeping nearby. Because in this world you do not sleep alone. You sleep with your family, sometimes 10 people, sometimes more. Parents, children, grandparents, uncles, aunts, all together in one small room. There is no privacy, there never has been. The idea of having your own bedroom, your own bed, your own quiet space, that idea simply does not exist here. The air is cool. Tenochtitlan sits high in the valley of Mexico, more than 2,000 meters above the sea. The mornings are cold, even in summer. You feel it on your skin as you slowly open your eyes. The room is dark. There are no windows, only a small doorway covered by a woven mat. But you can already hear sounds from outside. The soft padding of bare feet on packed earth. The distant cry of a baby. The low murmur of women already grinding corn for the morning meal. And somewhere, far away, the deep, slow beat of a drum from one of the great temples. That drum, you will hear it many times today. It marks the hours. It calls the priests to their duties. It announces ceremonies, arrivals, executions. The drum is the heartbeat of the city. And today, the drum is calling you to begin your day. You sit up slowly. Your back aches from the hard floor. Your stomach is empty. You are wearing a simple cotton garment, a kind of loose shirt that reaches just above your knees. If you are a man, it is called a tilmatli, a cloak knotted at one shoulder. If you are a woman, it is a hupil, a long blouse with a wrapped skirt below. The cloth is rough, woven by hand, and undyed, because already, before you have even stood up, the empire has told you who you are. You see, in the Aztec world, your clothes are not a choice. They are a law. The color of your cloak, the length of it, the patterns woven into it, all of this is decided by the empire, by something called the sumptuary laws. And these laws are very, very strict. If you are a common person, a macehualtin, you may only wear plain undyed cotton or even rougher cloth made from the maguey plant. Your cloak must not reach below your knees. You may not wear sandals inside the city. You may not wear cotton if you are very poor, only maguey fiber, which scratches the skin. You may not wear jewelry of gold or jade or fine feathers. You may not wear the color turquoise, which is reserved for the emperor alone. And if you break these rules, the punishment is not a fine. It is not a warning. It is death. Yes, death. For wearing the wrong cloak, for tying it at the wrong shoulder, for letting it fall a little too long. In the Aztec Empire, what you wear is who you are. And to pretend to be someone you are not, even in clothing, is a crime against the gods, against the emperor, against the entire order of the universe. So already, before you have taken your first step outside, before you have eaten your first bite of food, you have learnt the first great lesson of this world. The lesson that every man, every woman, every child in this city learns from the moment they can understand words. The lesson is this: you have a place, you were born into it, and you will stay in it forever. There is no climbing the ladder here, not really. There is no dreaming of becoming rich or famous or powerful if you were not born into a noble family. The only exception, the only door open to a common person, is war. If you are a man, and you are very, very brave, you may become a great warrior. You may capture enemies in battle, and if you capture enough, you may rise. You may wear cotton. You may wear sandals in the city. You may even, in time, be allowed to drink pulque, the sacred fermented drink, without being executed for it. But that path is narrow, and it is soaked in blood. We will return to it later in our journey. For now, you are still sitting on your reed mat. The sky outside is beginning to turn a soft, pale grey. The drum beats again, slow and deep, from the great temple far away. And it is time to begin your day. You stand up slowly. Your bare feet touch the cool earth floor. You reach for a small clay pot of water that sits near the doorway, and you splash a little on your face. This is your morning wash. There is no soap, not as we know it, but the Aztec people are, in fact, remarkably clean. Cleaner than most Europeans of the same time, by far. You will bathe later, in a steam bath called a temescal. But for now, this small splash of cold water is enough to wake you. Outside, the city is already alive. You step through the doorway and into a narrow lane between low houses. The lane is made of packed earth, swept clean. There is no rubbish. There are no animals running loose. The Aztecs are strict about cleanliness. Every morning, people sweep the streets in front of their homes. Every evening, special workers come to collect waste, which is carried away in canoes and used as fertilizer for the floating gardens. Yes, even human waste has a purpose here. Nothing is wasted. Nothing. You walk a few steps and come to the small open courtyard your family shares with 2 or 3 other families. In the center, a woman is kneeling on the ground. She is your mother, or your sister, or your wife, depending on who you are today. She is grinding corn on a flat stone called a metate, using a long stone roller called a mano, back and forth, slowly, patiently. She has been doing this since before the sun came up. This is the sound of every morning in the Aztec Empire. The slow, steady grinding of corn in every house, in every courtyard, in every village across the empire. Millions of women kneeling on the ground, grinding corn for hours. Because corn, here, is everything. Corn is life. Corn is food. Corn is the gift of the gods. The Aztecs believe that the gods made humans out of corn. And so to grind corn is, in a quiet way, to take part in creation itself. She nods to you as you pass. She does not speak much in the morning. There is too much to do. She has already been awake for 2 or 3 hours. She will be on her knees grinding for 2 or 3 hours more. Her hands are calloused. Her knees are dark with the marks of the stone. Her back will ache for the rest of her life. This is what it costs to put food on the floor, here, because there is no table. You will eat sitting on the floor, on a reed mat, with your family. Your breakfast is simple, a flat cake of corn called a tlaxcali. We would call it a tortilla today. It is warm just off the clay griddle. There is a small bowl of beans, mashed and seasoned with a little salt. Perhaps a few chilies ground into a rough paste. perhaps a small handful of dried, salted insects which are eaten here as a normal food, full of protein. Grasshoppers, ant eggs, worms from the maggie plant. To you, from our time, these foods may sound strange, but here they are ordinary, they are good, they are what keeps you alive. You drink water, plain clean water, brought into the city by the great aqueduct of Chapultepec, a wonder of engineering that brings fresh water from the hills all the way into the heart of Tenochtitlan. You do not drink milk. There are no cows here, there are no goats, there are no sheep. Until the Spanish arrive, more than 30 years from now, no one in this entire continent has ever tasted cow's milk, or cheese, or butter. You do not drink alcohol, not in the morning, not at any time of day really, because the Aztec law on drinking is perhaps the strictest in the entire ancient world. If you are a common person under the age of 52, and you are caught drunk in public, you will be executed, not warned, not fined, executed, the first offence, the first time. There is no second chance. Only the very old, those who have lived more than 52 years, are allowed to drink pulque, the mild fermented drink made from the maggie plant, and even they may only drink it on certain days, in certain ceremonies, in certain amounts. The Aztecs believe that drunkenness destroys the soul, destroys the family, destroys the order of the world, and so they have made it, quite simply, illegal to be young and drunk. You finish your simple breakfast, you wipe your hands on a small cloth, you stand up, and now the real day begins. You step out of the courtyard and into the wider street, and here for the first time you see Tenochtitlan in the morning light. And you stop, and you breathe, because what you see in front of you is unlike anything in the world. The sun is rising now, slowly, painting the eastern sky in soft shades of pink and gold. And in that light the city glows. White stone temples rise into the air, tall and pointed, their tops painted in bright red and deep blue. Smoke rises from 100 small fires. Canoes glide silently along the canals, carrying corn, carrying fish, carrying flowers to the great market. The water shines, the sky opens, and in the distance you can see the two great volcanoes that watch over the valley, their snowy peaks turning pale gold in the morning sun. Tenochtitlan, the city built on water, the city of 200,000 souls, larger than any city in Europe at this moment in history, larger than Paris, larger than London, larger than Rome, and the people who live here do not know that, of course. They simply know that this is the center of the world, the place chosen by the gods, the place where the eagle landed on the cactus and ate the serpent, just as the prophecy said, the place where the Mexica people, who were once poor wanderers, became the masters of an empire. You begin to walk. The streets are wide and straight, laid out in a careful grid. There are causeways crossing the lake, long stone roads built across the water, connecting the island city to the mainland. There are bridges that can be lifted in times of war. There are aqueducts running alongside the streets, carrying fresh water. There are great squares paved with stone. There are gardens, there are schools, there are temples on every corner, and everywhere there are people. Thousands and thousands of people, walking, carrying, trading, praying, sweeping, building. The city hums with a constant, gentle sound. Voices speaking the soft, flowing language of Nahuatl, the clack of stone tools, the slap of bare feet on stone, the distant beat of the drum. You walk a little further, and you come to a wide canal. There is a small wooden bridge. You cross it, and below you, in the water, a man is paddling a canoe full of flowers. Bright red, bright yellow, bright orange. Flowers are very important here. They are used in every ceremony, given as gifts, worn in the hair, placed at the temples. The Aztecs love flowers in a way that is hard for us to describe. They have poems about flowers. They have gods of flowers. They have entire festivals dedicated to flowers. In a world where so much is hard and dangerous, the flower is a small, quiet thing of beauty, and they hold it close. You walk on. The streets grow busier. You begin to see the great market in the distance, the market of Tlatelolco, which is perhaps the largest market in the entire world at this moment. 60,000 people every single day. Buyers, sellers, inspectors, judges, slaves, nobles, foreigners from distant tribes. All of them in one vast ordered space. And as you draw closer, you begin to smell it. The smell of the market, roasting corn, smoking chilies, fresh fish from the lake, flowers, herbs, sweat, smoke, copal incense, the smell of 1,000 things, all mixed together, carried on the morning breeze. You step into the market, and immediately you understand that you are in a place of strict, terrifying order. You see, the market of Tlatelolco is not chaos, it is not noisy, it is not loud, the way we might imagine a great ancient market to be. It is quiet, it is orderly. Each kind of good has its own section, its own row, its own place. Here the corn sellers, there the bean sellers, over there the chocolate, in raw cacao beans used as money, there the cloth, there the pottery, there the obsidian knives, there the medicinal herbs, there the slaves, sitting quietly in wooden collars, waiting to be sold. And walking through it all, slowly, watchfully, are the market judges. They wear special cloaks, they carry small wooden staffs, and they have absolute power within these walls. If you cheat a customer, they will punish you. If you sell a stolen good, they will punish you. If you use a false measure, they will punish you. And the punishments are not small. If you are caught stealing in the market of Tlatelolco, you may be beaten to death on the spot, right there, in front of everyone, by the judges, with wooden clubs, and the body will be left for a few hours as a warning to others. If you are caught using a false measure, a basket that looks full but has a false bottom, a stone weight that is lighter than it appears, you may have your goods destroyed, your stall broken, and you yourself may be sold into slavery or executed. There is no court of appeal. There is no second chance. The judges decide. And the judges are very, very fast. And yet, even with these brutal laws, the market is a place of wonder. You can buy anything here, anything in the world. Feathers from the quetzal bird, brought from the southern jungles, used to make the great headdresses of the nobles. Gold from the mines of the south, hammered into thin, delicate ornaments. Jade, more precious here than gold, deep green, polished smooth, chocolate in dark, bitter blocks, vanilla in long, thin pods, tobacco in dried leaves, rubber in soft black balls, used to play the sacred ball game, and food, so much food. Tomatoes in red and yellow and green, avocados soft and rich, sweet potatoes, squash, chia seeds, amaranth, tamales of every kind wrapped in corn husks, hot and steaming, fish from the lake, salted and dried, frogs, turtles, iguanas, ducks, deer, rabbits, even, sometimes, the small hairless dogs that are raised for meat. But you, the common person, you cannot buy most of these things, because most of these things are not for you. The fine feathers, the jade, the gold, the chocolate, the cotton cloth, these are for the nobles, for the priests, for the warriors who have proven themselves in battle. The sumptuary laws apply here too. If a common person is caught buying or wearing or eating something that is reserved for the noble class, the punishment is, once again, death. So you walk through the market, and you look, and you smell, and you wonder. But you do not touch, you do not reach. You do not even let your eyes linger too long on the things that are not for you. Because the judges are watching, and the judges are always watching. You come to a stall selling tamales. The smell is wonderful. Hot corn dough, wrapped in husks, filled with beans and a little chili. You have a small handful of cacao beans, the money of the empire. You hand over 4 beans. You receive 2 tamales. You bow your head to the seller, politely, and you step aside. This is how you live, carefully, quietly, in your place, watching the rules, watching the judges, watching the priests who walk through the market in their long black robes, their hair matted with dried blood, their faces painted black, silent and terrible. The priests do not buy anything. They do not need to. The temple feeds them. The empire feeds them. They are walking, every day, between the world of humans and the world of the gods. And everyone steps aside as they pass. You finish your tamales. You drink a little water from a clay cup at a public fountain. And now the sun is high. It is mid-morning, and you are needed, because in this world every common person has work to do, and the empire does not allow idle hands. If you are a farmer, you have already left the city by canoe, paddling out to the chinampas, the floating gardens, to tend the corn and the beans and the squash. If you are a fisherman, you are out on the lake, casting nets, catching small silver fish for the market. If you are a builder, you are working on one of the great temples, hauling stone, mixing lime, climbing scaffolds of wooden poles. If you are a weaver, you are sitting at your loom, fingers moving quickly, making the cotton cloth that the empire demands as tribute. If you are a porter, you are carrying loads on your back, sometimes loads of 40 or 50 kilos, walking long distances, because there are no wheels here, no horses, no oxen, no beasts of burden of any kind. Every load, every single load in this entire empire is carried by a human back. Yes, think about that for a moment. There are no carts, no wagons, no animals to pull them. The Aztecs know the wheel. In fact, they have small wheeled toys for children. We have found them. But they do not use the wheel for work, because in this land the terrain is rough, the lakes are many, and there are no animals big enough to pull a cart. So everything moves by canoe, on the water, or by human back, on the land. The great stones for the temples, the corn from the fields, the tribute from the conquered tribes, all of it carried by men, slowly, painfully, for hundreds of miles sometimes. And the empire demands a great deal of carrying, because the empire is hungry. The empire is always hungry, and the hunger of the empire is called tribute. Every year, every conquered city, every distant tribe must send tribute to Tenochtitlan. Corn, beans, cotton cloth, feathers, gold, jade, cacao, salt, honey, paper made from fig bark, mats, sandals, pottery, tools, slaves, captives for sacrifice. The lists go on and on and on, and the tribute must arrive on time, and it must be of the proper quality. And if a city fails to send its tribute, the armies of the empire come, and they come with fire, and they come with obsidian blades, and the city is punished, and the new tribute is doubled. So every day, in every part of the empire, men are walking to Tenochtitlan, carrying loads on their backs, stopping to rest, sleeping by the side of the road, eating cold tortillas, walking again, day after day, for weeks, for months, to bring the empire what the empire demands. And you, walking through your own day in the city, you see these men arriving. You see the long lines of porters coming across the causeway, bent under their loads. You see the officials of the empire counting, measuring, recording. You see the tribute being carried into the great storehouses near the temple. And you understand, in a quiet way, that you are standing in the center of a vast hungry machine, a machine that pulls the wealth of half a continent into one single city. A machine that has in just 100 years made the Mexica people the masters of millions. And you wonder, just for a moment, what happens when a machine like this stops being fed? What happens when the tribute does not come? What happens when the empire is no longer feared? But you do not let yourself think about that for long, because thinking about that is dangerous. Thinking about that in some ways is treason. And treason in this empire is punished in ways that are very hard to describe. So you keep walking, you go to your work, you bend your back, you do what you must do, and the sun climbs higher in the sky. It is now midday, the sun is hot. You stop for a moment in the shade of a wall, and you drink a little water. You wipe the sweat from your face, and it is at this moment, perhaps, that you hear it again, the drum. The great drum from the top of the Templo Mayor, the largest temple in the city. The drum is beating slowly, 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 and you know, without having to ask, what that drum means. There is a ceremony today. There is always a ceremony somewhere in this city. There are festivals for the rain god Tlag, festivals for the corn goddess Chicamequatl, festivals for the sun god Huitzilopochtli, festivals for Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, festivals for the dead, festivals for the new year, festivals for the first harvest, festivals for the last harvest. The Aztec calendar is filled with festivals, and every festival, every single one, requires offerings. Sometimes the offerings are small: flowers, incense, a drop of one's own blood, drawn from the earlobe or the tongue with a sharp thorn, a few drops placed on a piece of bark paper, burned in a small fire. This is normal. Every person does this. Children do this. Old men do this. Mothers do this for their children. It is a quiet, daily act of devotion. The gods are hungry, the priests say. They must be fed. And if they are not fed, the sun will not rise, the rain will not fall, the corn will not grow, the world will end. So you give your own blood a little, every day. It is small, it is bearable, it is part of life. But sometimes the offerings are larger. Sometimes the offerings are human. And today, walking through the city, you can feel it in the air, the slow drum, the thicker crowds, the priests moving with greater purpose, the smell of copal incense, heavier than usual, the silence of the people in the streets. There is a ceremony today at the great temple, and there will be captives. Captives taken in war, brought from distant cities, kept for months in special rooms. Today they will be offered to the gods. You do not have to be there. You do not have to watch. Most common people, in fact, do not attend these ceremonies. They continue with their work. They go to the market. They tend the chinampas. They walk through the streets. The sacrifices happen at the top of the Great Pyramid, far above the eyes of the ordinary citizens. From down in the streets, you only hear the drum, slowly, slowly, beating. And then, sometimes, after a long time, the drum changes. It beats once, and then once more. And you know that one captive has gone to the gods, and then another, and then another. This is the rhythm of the empire, the rhythm of the day, the rhythm of life itself, here. For the Aztecs, this is not cruelty, this is not horror, this is, in their understanding, the most sacred thing they can do. They believe that the sun itself is dying, slowly, every single day, and that the only way to keep the sun alive, to keep it rising in the morning, to keep the universe from collapsing into darkness, is to feed it with the most precious thing in the world, with human blood, with human life. They believe that their gods, long ago, gave their own lives to create the world, to create the sun, to create the moon, to create the corn. And so the humans, in return, must give back, in small amounts, in small offerings, the same gift. It is a debt, a sacred debt, a debt that can never be fully paid, but must be paid every single day for as long as the world exists. You can understand this if you try. You can see in the priest's eyes that they are not cruel men. They are deeply, terribly serious men. They believe with every fibre of their being that what they are doing is keeping the world alive, that if they stopped, the sun would fail, that if they stopped, all of humanity would die. And so they do not stop. They have not stopped for hundreds of years, and they will not stop until the strangers come from across the sea with their horses and their iron and their crosses, and end everything. But that is still 30 years away. Today the drum beats slowly, and the captives climb the great steps of the temple, and the sun shines down on Tenochtitlan, and you walk on through your day with the drum beating softly behind you. You return to your work. You finish the tasks the day requires. The sun begins to lower. The shadows grow long. The drum stops, at last, in the late afternoon. The ceremony is over, and the city slowly returns to its ordinary rhythm. In the evening, you go to the Temescal, the steam bath, which is in a small stone building near your home. You crawl into the low entrance. Hot stones, heated in a fire outside, are placed inside. Water is poured on them. The steam rises, thick and white. You sit in the dark, in the heat, and you sweat. You sweat out the dust of the day. You sweat out the worry. You sweat out the small, quiet fear that lives in every Aztec heart. The fear of the gods, the fear of the priests, the fear of the empire, the fear of being seen, of being judged, of being chosen. When you come out of the Temazcal, the night air is cool. The stars are beginning to show. You walk slowly home. The streets are quieter now. Small fires glow in courtyards. The smell of cooking corn drifts on the breeze. You eat your evening meal, simple again, tortillas and beans and a little chili. You sit with your family. You speak a few quiet words. You do not say much. The Aztecs are not a loud people. They speak gently, formally, with great respect, even within the family. The children sit quietly. The old people are honored. The meal is short, and then, slowly, the family lies down on the reed mats. The fire is banked. The doorway is covered. The last candle, made of beeswax or pine resin, is blown out. And the house is dark. You lie on your mat. You pull your thin blanket around you. You close your eyes, and in the darkness, you hear the sounds of the city falling asleep. A dog barking, far away. A baby crying, briefly. The slow creak of a canoe on the canal. And, somewhere, far above the temples, the soft hooting of an owl. And you think, in the last moments before sleep, about the day you have lived, the morning light on the temples, the smell of the market, the slow beat of the drum, the careful walking, the careful watching, the careful staying in your place. You have lived one day in the Aztec Empire, and you have survived it. But it took every single thing you had, every careful step, every quiet word, every glance turned downward, every law obeyed, every rule remembered, every flicker of doubt pushed deep, deep down, where no one could see it. And tomorrow you will have to do it again, and the day after, and the day after that, for all the days of your life, because in this empire there is no other way. There is only the order, the gods, the drum, the corn, the blood, and the slow, slow rhythm of a world that asks every single morning for everything you have and then asks for it again. This is why you would not last a day in the Aztec Empire, not because of the violence, not because of the strange foods, not because of the bare floors and the cold mornings and the long, long hours of work, but because of the weight of belonging completely to something larger than yourself, the weight of laws that decide what you wear and what you eat and what you drink and what you may dream of becoming, the weight of gods who must be fed, the weight of a city that watches every step, the weight of a place where there is no room at all, for the small modern idea that you are, in some private way, your own. You would not last a day, because in the Aztec Empire, the day does not belong to you. The day belongs to the empire, and the empire in its turn belongs to the gods, and the gods are always, always hungry. Now, as the night deepens and you drift towards sleep on your reed mat, let your breathing slow, let your shoulders soften, let the soft sound of the drum far away fade into the dark. There is nothing more to do today. There is nothing more to fear for now. The fire is out, the doorway is covered, the family is breathing slowly, all around you. The stars wheel quietly over the great city on the lake. And in the quiet, our journey is not yet over. There is more to learn, more to see, more to wander through in this strange and beautiful and terrible world. So rest, dear listener, rest. And when you are ready, we will go on. We will meet the warriors who trained for years to capture, not to kill. We will sit at the table of the common people, and we will see what they truly ate in the long months between harvests. And we will, gently, quietly, lift the veil on the lives of the women of this empire, whose stories are so rarely told. But for now, sleep. Sleep deeply. The drum is silent. The lake is still. And the long, long night of Tenochtitlan is waiting to hold you gently in its arms. If you are still with me, settle in once again. Let your shoulders drop. Let your jaw soften. Let your hands rest gently at your sides. We are returning to the valley of Mexico. We are returning to the great city on the lake. But this time we are not walking through the market. We are not lying on a reed mat at dawn. This time we are going to follow a single thread through the empire, a thread that runs through the lives of every young man born in this world. We are going to follow the long, slow, painful path of the Aztec warrior. The path that took ordinary boys and turned them into the most feared fighters in all of Mesoamerica. The path of the eagle, the path of the jaguar, the path that began for some of them almost on the day they were born. So close your eyes if you wish. Take a slow breath in and a slow breath out, and come with me back across the centuries to a quiet morning in a small, low house, somewhere in the great city of Tenochtitlan. A baby has just been born, a boy. The midwife holds him in her hands. She has washed him gently in warm water. She has wrapped him in a soft cloth woven of cotton. And now, before she gives him to his mother, she speaks to him. Yes, to the newborn. She speaks softly but clearly. She says words that have been spoken to every Aztec boy for hundreds of years. She says, "My son, my beloved son, you have come into this world. You have come to a place of pain. You have come to a place of suffering. You have come to a place of weariness. You have come to a place where you will labor. You will struggle. You will know cold and heat and hunger and thirst. But you have also come to do the work of the gods. You have come to be a warrior. You have come perhaps to give the gods your blood. You have come perhaps to climb the steps of the temple. Welcome, my son. Welcome to the world." And then she places, very gently, into his tiny hands 4 small objects: a small wooden shield, a small wooden arrow, a small wooden sword, and a small wooden bow. This is the first moment of the warrior's life. He cannot see, he cannot speak, he cannot even hold the toys. But the empire has already given him his future. The empire has already told him who he is. He is a soldier. He is the property of the gods of war. And from this moment on, every step of his life will be shaped, slowly, patiently, terribly, toward the day he will pick up his real weapons and walk into battle. The midwife takes the small wooden weapons. She wraps them carefully in cloth, and then she buries them. Yes, she buries them outside the house, in a place that the family will remember. Because these toys are not for play. These toys are an offering to the gods of war, a promise that this boy, in time, will give them the only thing that matters, his courage, his blood, his life. And the family bows their heads, and they whisper their thanks, and the baby cries softly in his mother's arms, and the day goes on. This is how it begins, dear listener. In the very first hours of life, before the boy can even understand the world has already claimed him. Now let us move forward slowly through the years. Let us watch this boy grow. Let us see what they did to him day by day to make him into what the empire needed him to be. In the first 3 years of his life, the boy lives with his mother. He is held, he is fed, he is sung to. The Aztecs love their children, deeply and tenderly. The mothers carry their babies in soft cotton wraps on their backs, going about their work, the baby's head resting against their shoulder. The fathers, when they come home from the fields or the workshops, hold the babies in their arms and speak to them in low, gentle voices. There is great affection in these years, great softness. The Aztec home, in these early years, is a place of warmth, but at the age of 3, something begins to change. At 3 years old, the boy is given his first responsibilities, small ones, tiny ones. He is taught to carry a small water jug from the courtyard to the house. He is taught to fetch a piece of firewood. He is taught to gather a few corn husks. The portions are tiny, the work is light, but it is work, and he is expected to do it every day without complaint. If he cries, he is not comforted. If he refuses, he is not coaxed. He is simply told again what to do. And if he still refuses, his father will speak to him, sternly, in the low and serious voice that Aztec fathers use. He will be told, my son, that empire needs men, the gods need warriors. There is no time in this world for a child to be soft. You must learn to do what is asked of you. You must learn to do it well. You must learn to do it without complaint. And the boy learns, slowly, carefully, as all Aztec boys learn. By the age of 5, he is carrying real loads, small bundles of firewood, almost as heavy as he is, pots of water from the public fountain, baskets of corn from the market. He is sent on small errands across the neighborhood, alone. He is learning already to navigate the city, to remember the names of streets and the locations of buildings, to greet adults with the proper bow, to lower his eyes when a noble passes. By the age of 7, he has his first real punishments. Aztec punishments for children are not gentle. They are documented in the painted books that have survived, and the images are sometimes hard to look at. A boy who has lied is held over a fire of burning chili peppers and forced to breathe the smoke. Not for long, but long enough. Long enough to feel the burn in his lungs, the tears running down his face, the desperate need for air. The smoke is meant to teach him that lies have consequences, that the truth must be spoken, that the warrior, above all, must be a man whose word can be trusted. A boy who has been lazy is stripped of his cloak and made to lie on the cold ground for an hour, while the family eats inside the warm house. A boy who has spoken back to his elders is pricked with maguey spines, the long sharp thorns of the agave plant, on his arms and legs. The pricks are small, the blood that comes is small, but the message is clear: respect, obedience, discipline. These are the iron bones of Aztec life. And through all of this, the boy is told, over and over again, that he is being prepared. He is being prepared for the day, the great day, the day when he will leave his family home and go to school. Yes, school, in the Aztec Empire. You may be surprised to hear this, dear listener, but the Aztecs had a system of compulsory education that was, in some ways, more advanced than anything in Europe at the same time. Every single boy in the empire, whether the son of a noble or the son of a common farmer, whether rich or poor, every boy was required by law to attend school. There were no exceptions, there were no excuses. If a family failed to send their son to school, the family was punished, sometimes severely. The empire needed soldiers, the empire needed priests, the empire needed builders and traders and scribes, and so the empire trained them, all of them. There were two kinds of schools. The first, and the more prestigious, was called the Kame-Kak. The Kame-Kak was the school of the nobles. It was attached to the great temples, it was run by the priests, and inside its walls the sons of the high families were taught the deepest knowledge of the empire, the reading and writing of the painted books, the astronomy of the calendar, the histories of the ancestors, the chants and rituals of the gods, the arts of leadership, the strategies of war. The Kame-Kak produced the leaders, the high priests, the generals, the royal advisors, the men who would one day stand at the side of the emperor himself. The second school was called the Telpakali. This was the school of the common people. It was in every neighborhood of the city. Every district had one. And to the Telpakali went the sons of the farmers, the weavers, the fishermen, the porters, the small craftsmen, the boys who would never be priests, the boys who would never be generals, the boys who would, most of them, spend their lives at hard physical work, but the boys who were also, every single one of them, expected to fight, expected to go to war, expected one day to take a captive in battle, or to die trying. The boy we are following, the boy born in the small house, the boy whose first toys were buried in the earth, this boy is the son of common people, and so he will go to the Telpachikali, and his story, from this point forward, is the story of how the Aztec Empire turned a quiet child of 7 into a hardened warrior of 20. He enters the school at the age of 15, in most cases, sometimes a little earlier, sometimes a little later. The day he enters is a solemn one. His parents take him to the Telpakali. They bring small gifts to the teachers. They bow their heads. They speak the formal words of giving. They say, "Take this boy. He is no longer ours. He belongs to the school. He belongs to the gods of war. Teach him, shape him, punish him as you must. We will not interfere. We will not complain. We give him to you completely." And then they leave him, and they walk home, and the boy, who has lived all his life with his mother and father, now sleeps in a long low room with 30 or 40 other boys, all from his neighborhood, and his real training begins. The Telpachikali was not primarily a place of books. The boys did learn some things. They learnt songs, they learnt the basic histories, they learnt the names of the gods and the rituals of the festivals. They learnt the deep moral codes of the Aztec people, the codes about honor, about duty, about courage, about the proper way to speak and behave. But most of the day, most of every day, was spent in physical labor and in fighting. The boys woke before dawn. They washed in cold water. They were given a small breakfast, often just a tortilla and a little chili. And then they went to work. Real work, heavy work, the kind of work that broke the body slowly, day by day. They were sent to carry stones for the building of the temples. They were sent to dig channels for the canals. They were sent to repair the causeways. They were sent to clean the streets, to repair the aqueducts, to gather firewood from distant forests. They worked sometimes 12 hours a day. They worked in the rain. They worked in the heat. They worked when they were sick. They worked when they were tired. They worked and they did not complain, because complaining was punished, and every evening, after the work was done, the real training began. They were taught to fight. The Aztec warrior, dear listener, did not fight with the weapons we might imagine. He did not fight with steel. He did not fight with iron. The Aztec world had no iron, no steel, no metal weapons of any kind for war. Instead, the warrior fought with weapons made of wood and stone, and these weapons, made carefully by skilled craftsmen, were, in their own way, terrifying. The first and most famous weapon was the macehualtin. This was a long wooden club, about the length of a man's arm, but along its edges, inserted into careful grooves, were rows of obsidian blades. Obsidian, volcanic glass, the sharpest natural substance known, sharper than the finest surgical scalpel of our modern world. A blade of obsidian could split a single hair lengthwise. A blade of obsidian, swung with force, could take a man's head from his shoulders in a single stroke. The macehualtin was the sword of the empire, and every boy in the Telpoculi, from the age of 15, trained with it. Every single day, for hours, they began with wooden practice clubs. No obsidian, just wood. They struck at posts, they struck at hanging bags filled with sand. They struck at each other. They were taught the angles, the footwork, the slow, careful rhythm of attack and defense. The Aztec warrior did not fight wildly. He fought with discipline, with patience, with a quiet, terrible focus. And the boys slowly learnt this. They also learnt the spear, the tepostapili, a long wooden pole tipped with rows of obsidian blades. They learnt the atlat, a kind of spear thrower, an ancient device that allowed a warrior to launch a short javelin with great speed and accuracy. They learnt the bow, made of strong wood, with arrows tipped in obsidian or bone. They learnt the sling. They learnt to throw stones with deadly precision. They learnt to use the shield, the chimali, a round shield of woven reeds and animal hide, sometimes decorated with bright feathers and small ornaments of copper or gold. And they learnt, perhaps most importantly, to fight not to kill, but to capture. This, dear listener, is one of the strangest and most important truths about the Aztec way of war. They did not fight to destroy their enemies. They did not fight to kill them in the field. They fought to take them alive, to bring them back to Tenochtitlan, to offer them to the gods. Think about how strange this is. Think about how difficult. In every other warrior culture in the world, the goal of battle is to kill the enemy as quickly as possible, to put him down, to remove him from the fight. But not here. Here the Aztec warrior had to approach an enemy who was trying to kill him. He had to fight that enemy. He had to defeat that enemy. But he had to do it without killing him, without striking the death blow. He had to wound the enemy, knock him down, grab him by the hair, drag him behind the lines, and bind him for the journey home. This is harder than killing, much harder. Killing is, in many ways, simple. A clean blow, a swift strike. The enemy falls, the fight is over. But capture is slow. Capture is dangerous. Capture means staying close to a man who still wants to kill you. Capture means using less than your full strength. Capture means risking your own life every second the enemy is still moving. And yet, this was the entire purpose of Aztec war. Because in the Aztec belief, the captive was the sacred offering. The captive was the gift to the gods. The captive's blood, given at the top of the temple, kept the sun rising. A dead enemy on the battlefield was, in some ways, almost a wasted enemy. A captive enemy, walking back across the causeway in a wooden collar, was a treasure beyond price. And so the boys in the Telpoculi trained for capture. They were taught how to seize an enemy by the hair. The Aztec warriors wore their own hair tied in a particular knot, called a tamiliotl, which marked their rank. To grab another warrior by his tamiliotl and pull him to the ground was the ancient sign of victory. The boys practiced this over and over on each other. They wrestled, They threw each other. They learnt to use the macehualtin with the flat side, the dull side, to stun an enemy rather than slice him open. They learnt the careful, controlled, restrained use of obsidian blades, blades that could kill in a single touch, but had to be turned aside, used only for wounding, only for slowing the enemy down. This restraint, this terrible discipline, was the hardest thing the boys had to learn. Many failed. Many died, in fact, in training. The obsidian blades, even on the practice weapons, could cut. The wrestling could kill, if a boy struck his head on a stone. The long marches, the cold nights, the days of hunger, the punishments, the constant pressure, all of this broke many boys. They became sick. They despaired. Some ran away and were brought back and beaten. Some fell from cliffs during training marches. Some drowned crossing rivers. Some simply lay down one night and did not get up in the morning. The body had given up. The spirit had given up. And the school accepted these losses, quietly, as the price of the warriors who would emerge. For those who did not break, who did not die, who did not run, the years of the Telpakali were long and slow and hard. 5 years, sometimes more. 5 years of work and training, of obedience and discipline, of cold water in the morning and bruises by night. 5 years of learning to hate weakness. 5 years of learning to love the empire. 5 years of learning, deep in the bones, that there was nothing more important than the gods, the city, and the brotherhood of warriors. And at the end of those years, the boy was 20, or 21, and he was sent to war. His first war was always, in some sense, a test. The older warriors watched the new ones carefully. They moved them to the front lines, but they kept them within range of support. They wanted to see what the boys would do. Would they fight? Would they run? Would they freeze? Would they, when the moment came, take a captive? The first capture was everything. Everything. A young man who had never taken a captive was called a tlamani, a captor in waiting. He still wore his hair short, like a boy. He could not paint his face. He could not wear cotton. He could not, in any meaningful sense, claim to be a man. But if he took his first captive, alone, in the field, in a fair fight, everything changed. He returned to Tenochtitlan a different person. His parents wept with joy. The neighbors gathered. The young man went to the temple, and the priests cut his hair in the new style, the style of a warrior. He could now wear a simple cloak of plain cotton. He could now drink pulque on the festival days, if he was older than the strict age limits. He could now wear sandals inside the city, on certain days. He was, at last, a man, and then he was sent to take more captives, because one was not enough. 2 captives gave him slightly better cloth, slightly better food, slightly better quarters. 3 captives gave him a small, simple feather ornament in his hair. 4 captives, 4 captives, this was the great threshold. With 4 captives, a man could begin to enter the higher ranks of the warrior society. He could be considered for the great companies. He could begin to dream of becoming a knight. The Aztecs had 2 great warrior orders, 2 brotherhoods that stood above all the rest: the Eagle warriors and the Jaguar warriors. The Eagle warriors, the Quapipotin, were the warriors of the sun. They wore helmets shaped like the head of an eagle, with the beak coming over the brow, and feathers cascading down the back. Their costumes were made of brilliant feathers, sewn carefully onto a tight cotton suit. Their shields were painted with the symbols of the sun. They were said to be the soldiers of Huitzilopochtli, the great war god of the empire, the god who needed blood to keep the sun rising. The Jaguar warriors, the Oxelopipotin, were the warriors of the earth. They wore the actual skin of the jaguar, the great spotted cat of the southern jungles, draped over their bodies. The jaguar's head served as a helmet, with the jaws opening over the warrior's face. They were said to be the soldiers of Tezcatlipoca, the dark god, the god of night, the god of fate. Their power was the silent, hidden, terrible power of the great hunting cat. To enter these orders, a warrior needed at least 4 captives. More was better. Many warriors fought for years, accumulating captives, climbing slowly toward the great brotherhoods. And when they reached the threshold, when the priests judged them worthy, there was a long and solemn ceremony. The new knight was presented to the emperor himself. He received his costume of feathers, or of jaguar skin. He received his special weapons. He received the right to live in the warrior quarters of the city, to eat at the warrior tables, to participate in the great councils of war. He had risen as far as a common-born man could rise. He had achieved something close to nobility. His sons would be educated at the Karmekuk. His family would be raised just a little above their station. He had done it. He had climbed the impossible ladder, but the price had been terrible. Most warriors did not live long. The constant wars of the empire, the wars against the Tlaxcala and the Tarascans and the distant Mayan kingdoms, took thousands of lives every year. A warrior who survived to 30 was unusual. A warrior who survived to 40 was rare. Many died in their 20s on the battlefield, taken by an obsidian blade, or by the spear of an enemy. Many more died of wounds afterward, since the medicine of the empire, though sophisticated, could not always heal what the obsidian had cut. The infection was the great killer, the slow fever after a wound, the blackening of the flesh, the fading away into death, in a small house, with the family praying around the bed. And there was another kind of death, dear listener, a death that haunted every Aztec warrior, the death of capture. You see, the Aztecs were not the only ones who fought to capture. Their great enemies, the Tlaxcalans to the east, also fought this way. So did many other peoples of Mesoamerica. The Aztec way of war was the way of the entire region. And so when a warrior went into battle, he knew that the men opposite him, the men he was trying to capture, were also trying to capture him. And if they succeeded, his fate was sealed. A captured warrior was taken back to the enemy city. He was treated in some ways with great honor. He was fed. He was given fine clothes. He was sometimes given a kind of bride, a woman to comfort him in his last days. The Aztecs called these months the time of feasting. The captive was treated as a precious offering, a god in temporary human form. He was paraded through the streets. He was celebrated. He was honored. And then, on the appointed day, he was led up the great steps of the temple. And there, at the top, the priests took him, and he was offered to the gods of the enemy. This was the fate that every Aztec warrior knew, in his deepest heart, awaited him if he failed. Not death in battle. That was clean. That was simple. But the slow walk up the temple steps in a foreign city, with foreign priests waiting at the top. This was the great fear. And yet, here is the strangest thing, dear listener. The Aztec warriors did not fear this fate the way we might. They had been trained, since the age of 15, to see this kind of death as the highest honor. To be sacrificed, even by an enemy, was to be chosen by the gods. To die at the top of a temple was to join the sun itself, to ride across the morning sky for 4 years, to become a hummingbird, to drink the nectar of the sacred flowers in paradise. The warriors believed this. They had been told it, over and over, since boyhood. And they walked, when their time came, up those temple steps with a kind of strange and terrible peace. The chronicles tell us, in fact, that captured Aztec warriors often sang as they climbed. Songs of pride, songs of victory, songs of meeting the sun. This, perhaps, is the deepest part of the warrior's training. Not the macehualtin, not the obsidian, not the long marches and the cold nights, but the slow, patient, decade-long reshaping of the soul, the reshaping that made a young man stand calmly before his own death, the reshaping that made him see the steps of the temple not as a place of horror, but as a path of light. The reshaping that turned a frightened boy of 7, holding his first wooden practice club in trembling hands, into a man of 25 who could climb to his own death singing. This is what the empire did to its young men. This is what it took, day by day, year by year, to make an Aztec warrior. Let us walk now, dear listener, to the great houses where the warriors lived, the houses of the Eagle Knights. There were several of these in Tenochtitlan. The greatest was near the central temple, a large stone building with carved facades, with rooms full of feather costumes hanging on the walls, with courtyards where the warriors gathered to share food and to tell stories. The smell inside these houses was particular. The smell of copal incense burning slowly, the smell of cotton and feathers and old wood, the smell of clean stone swept every day by the young apprentices, and under all of these smells, faintly, almost imperceptibly, the smell of dried blood from the ceremonial weapons that hung along the walls. The warriors who lived in these houses were not always at war. Most of their days, in fact, were quiet. They trained in the mornings on the courtyards, sparring with each other, keeping their bodies sharp. They ate together, sitting on reed mats in long rows, served by the apprentices. They spoke of past battles. They spoke of strategy. They spoke often of the gods and of the philosophy of war, which was a serious matter for the Aztecs. They had long debates, recorded in the painted books, about the meaning of courage, about the duty of the warrior, about the proper way to face death, and they sang. The Aztec warriors had songs, many songs, long, intricate songs that told the histories of the empire, the stories of the great battles, the deeds of the famous warriors of the past. These songs were sung at festivals, at funerals, at the gathering of the warrior houses. They were sung in a particular style, a slow and solemn chant, with a single voice leading and the others joining in at the appropriate moments. The songs could last for hours. Some have survived to our day, preserved in old manuscripts, and we can read them, though we can only imagine how they sounded when sung by men who had walked, themselves, through the world the songs described. One of these songs, a famous one, contains these lines more or less. I am translating loosely. The Aztec poetic style is not easy to render in our language, but the song says, more or less, my friends, listen, we have come here only to dream. We have come here only to sleep. It is not true that we live on this earth. It is not true that we stay long. Even the jade is broken. Even the gold is shattered. Even the bright quetzal feather is torn apart. We are not here forever. We are here only for a moment. So while you are here, my friends, my brothers, let us sing. Let us drink the cocoa of the warriors. Let us look at the flowers. Let us remember that we are dreams, only dreams, and that soon we will return to the place from which we came. This was the philosophy of the Aztec warrior, a strange mix of fierce discipline and gentle melancholy, a sense that life was both terribly important and almost weightless, a sense that the warrior must fight with everything he had, must train every day, must take captives and climb the ladder of honor, must do all of this, even while knowing that it was in the end only a dream, only a passing moment, only a flower that bloomed and faded. The songs were sung quietly, in the warrior houses, in the long evenings, with the candles burning low, and the city sleeping outside. And in those quiet evenings, the warriors sometimes spoke of things that they did not speak of in public. They spoke very softly of fear, of the fear they had felt in their first battle, of the fear they still felt, sometimes, before a campaign. They spoke of friends who had died. They spoke of friends who had been captured, and who had walked up the steps of an enemy temple, and who had not come home. They spoke of these things, in low voices, in the dark. Because even the bravest men, dear listener, even the warriors of the eagle and the jaguar, were still men, still human, still afraid sometimes in the deep hours of the night. And they helped each other. The brotherhood of the warriors was real. It was perhaps the deepest bond in Aztec society. The men who had trained together, who had fought together, who had taken captives together, were closer than brothers. They would die for each other on the battlefield. They would help raise each other's sons if a man was killed. They would carry the body home and weep and burn incense and sing the songs of the dead. The warriors of the empire were lonely in many ways, separated from the ordinary life of the city, but they were not alone with each other. They had their brotherhood, and it was perhaps the only true comfort their lives allowed them. Let us follow one of these warriors now on a campaign. Let us see what war was really like in the Aztec Empire. Not the war of legends, not the war of feather costumes and noble speeches, but the war as it actually was, on the long, dusty roads of Mesoamerica. The campaign begins with a council. The emperor and his advisors gather in the great palace. They consider the situation. A distant city has refused to pay tribute. A new region is to be conquered. An enemy has insulted an Aztec merchant on the road. The reasons for war are many, and they are, in truth, often quite small. The Aztecs went to war easily. They went to war often. They went to war sometimes, simply because they needed more captives for an upcoming festival. The great festivals of the empire required hundreds, sometimes thousands of captives, and if the prison rooms were not full, a war was arranged to fill them. Once the council decides on war, the orders go out. Messengers run from the palace, through the streets, to the warrior houses, to the captains, to the towns and villages of the empire. The army is gathering. The men prepare. They check their weapons. They check their armor. The armor of the Aztec warrior was made of thick quilted cotton, soaked in salt water, and then dried in the sun. This armor, surprisingly, was very effective. It could stop an obsidian blade. It could turn a spear. The Spanish, when they arrived years later, were so impressed with this cotton armor that they began wearing it themselves, in place of their hot and heavy steel breastplates. But that is another story. There is, in every empire, a story that is rarely told, a story that hides in the corners of the painted books, that lives in the margins of the great chronicles, that whispers from beneath the louder voices of kings and priests and warriors. It is the story of the women, and in the Aztec Empire, perhaps more than in many places, this story is one we must work hard to recover, because the voices of these women have, for the most part, been silent for 500 years. Tonight, let us walk together into that silence. Let us listen, carefully, for the small sounds that remain. Let us look, gently, into the small houses, into the kitchens, into the temples and the schools and the marketplaces, and let us see, as best we can, what it meant to be born female in the great empire by the lake. Let us begin where every Aztec life began, at birth. A baby girl is born in a small house at the edge of Tenochtitlan. The midwife, the Tlamatclitl, has been with the mother for hours. The midwife is an old woman, wise in the ways of birth, trained from her own youth in the long traditions of her craft. She has herbs, she has steam, she has prayers, she has, above all, patience. The Aztec midwives were among the most respected women in the empire. They were paid well. They were called upon by both the noble and the common. They were, in some ways, the only women in the entire society who held a recognized and powerful profession outside the home. The midwife catches the baby in her hands. She washes her gently in warm water, and then she speaks to her. Yes, dear listener, the midwife speaks to the newborn girl, just as the midwife spoke to the newborn boy in our earlier story. But the words are different, very different. To the boy, the midwife said, "You have come to be a warrior. You have come to give the gods your blood. You have come to climb the steps of the temple." To the girl, the midwife says, My beloved daughter, my precious dove, you have come to the world. You have come to suffer. You have come to be weary. You have come to be a homemaker. Your work will be in the heart of the house, like the heart in the chest. You will be the ashes that cover the fire. You will be the 3 stones on which the cooking pot rests. Your place is here. Your place is by the hearth. Your place is by the grinding stone. Welcome, my daughter. Welcome to your work. And then the midwife takes 4 small objects, just as she did with the boy. But these are different objects. They are not weapons, they are tools. A small distaff for spinning thread, a small wooden weaving stick, a small grinding stone, a small broom. These are the weapons of the Aztec woman. These are the tools that will fill her hands every day from the time she is large enough to lift them until the day she dies. The midwife buries these tools in the ashes of the hearth, not outside like the boy's wooden swords, which were buried in the earth where the warriors walked. The girl's tools are buried in the ashes of the kitchen fire, because that is where she will spend her life, not on the battlefield, not in the temple courtyard, not on the long roads of trade and war, but here, in this small house, by this small fire, forever. The umbilical cord, when it is cut, is treated with the same care. The boy's cord, you may remember, is given to a warrior to carry into battle, to be buried far from home, in a distant land, as a sign that the boy will travel and fight. But the girl's cord is buried, gently beneath the grinding stone in the kitchen, right there, in the place where she will kneel every morning for the rest of her life. The cord is buried as a kind of promise, a binding, a way of saying, this girl belongs to this place, her body has been planted here, she will not leave. This is the first lesson of the Aztec girl's life, before she can understand, before she can speak. Her future has been declared, and her body has been planted, and the ashes of the kitchen fire have closed over her tools, and the world has decided, in the first hour after her birth, who she will be. Let us now follow this girl through the years, slowly as we followed the boy. Let us see what the empire did to her, to make her into what it needed her to be. In her first years, she is loved, deeply and tenderly. The Aztecs, as we have said, loved their children with great softness. The mother carries the baby girl in a cotton wrap on her back. She sings to her, she kisses her, she nurses her for 2, sometimes 3 years. The Aztec women breastfed their babies longer than many cultures, and there was a quiet wisdom in this. The long nursing helped to space the births. It helped the mother's body to recover. It helped the child to grow strong on the good milk of a woman who herself ate well. But by the time the girl is 4, she is already learning. She watches her mother, she watches her grandmother, she watches her older sisters, if she has them. She watches the women of the courtyard, who come to grind together, to spin together, to share the small tasks of the day. And she begins to imitate. With small fingers, she tries to spin a thread. With small hands, she tries to pat out a tiny tortilla. With small feet, she follows her mother to the canal, to fetch water, carrying a tiny jug on her head. By the age of 6, she is doing real work, sweeping the courtyard, fetching small bundles of firewood, carrying messages between the houses of the neighborhood, watching the younger children, the babies, while the mothers grind and weave. She is, at 6 years old, already a small worker in the household, and she is praised gently when she does well, and she is corrected gently when she does not. The Aztec mothers, the chronicles tell us, did not often beat their young daughters. The discipline was different. It was the slow, patient, constant teaching, the endless small corrections, the careful shaping of the hands and the body, hour by hour, day by day, until the girl simply knew, without being told, how to do the work of a woman. By the age of 7 or 8, she begins to learn the metody. She kneels beside her mother, who is already kneeling. She watches, She tries. Her small hands cannot push the mano with the right pressure yet. Her arms tire quickly. Her knees ache from the cold stone. But she keeps trying. Every day, a little more, a little better. Slowly, over the years, the calluses begin to form on her hands. The dark marks begin to appear on her knees. Her arms thicken. Her back grows stronger. By the time she is 12, she can grind for hours without stopping. She can produce enough masa for several tortillas. She is becoming, in the slow, patient way of her culture, what she was born to be. She is also learning all this time to spin and to weave. Yes, dear listener, the spinning and the weaving. These were perhaps the second great work of the Aztec woman, after the grinding of corn. Every woman in the empire, from the poorest peasant to the queen herself, spent enormous portions of her life with a distaff and a spindle, twisting fibre into thread, and with a backstrap loom, weaving thread into cloth. The fibre came from two sources. For the common people, it was the maguey plant, the great agave, whose long leaves contained tough white fibres. The leaves were cut, soaked, beaten with stones, and the fibres were combed out and washed. The result was a rough, scratchy material that could be spun into thread, but the thread was coarse, and the cloth that came from it was rough on the skin. The poorest people wore clothing made entirely of maguey fibre. It scratched, it chafed, but it lasted. It was warm enough. It was what they had. For the wealthier common people, and for the nobles, there was cotton. The cotton, of course, did not grow in the cold highlands of Tenochtitlan. It came from the warmer regions of the empire, as tribute, in great bales carried by the porters. Cotton was a treasure. Cotton was a luxury. To wear cotton was a privilege regulated, as you remember, by the sumptuary laws. The cotton was prepared by the women. It was cleaned, it was carded, it was spun, and then it was woven. The backstrap loom, the tela de cintura, was the great tool of the Aztec weaver. It was a simple thing in its construction. A few wooden sticks, some cords, a leather strap that went around the waist of the weaver. One end of the loom was tied to a tree or a post. The other end was held by the strap around the woman's waist. By leaning back, she put tension on the threads. By leaning forward, she released the tension. By passing the shuttle between the threads, by lifting and lowering the heddles, she created the cloth, line by line, thread by thread, in a process that was slow, careful, almost meditative. A single woman, weaving full-time, might take weeks to produce a single piece of fine cloth. The intricate designs that the noble women wove, with their patterns of flowers and birds and abstract symbols, could take months. The dyes were made from natural materials. The deep red came from the coconilla, the small insects of the cactus. The blue came from a plant called anil, related to indigo. The yellow came from certain flowers. The brown came from tree barks. The black came from a particular mud, mixed with iron. And the brilliant scarlet, the most precious colour of all, was the privilege of the nobles alone. Cloth in the Aztec Empire was money, not in the way that cacao beans were money, used for small daily transactions, but in a larger sense. Cloth was wealth. Cloth was tribute. The conquered provinces of the empire paid their tribute, in large part in cloth. Tens of thousands of cloaks, every year, flowed into the storehouses of Tenochtitlan, and the women of those provinces, weaving day and night, produced the cloth that the empire demanded. If they did not produce enough, the tribute officials came, and the punishments were severe, and so the weaving, like the grinding, was a constant. In every house, in every village, in every region of the empire, women at their looms, women at their grinding stones, from childhood to old age. The slow, patient work that built in cloth and corn the foundation of an entire civilization. But the work of women, dear listener, did not stop with grinding and weaving. There was much, much more. There was the cooking, which was an art in itself, and which we have already touched on in our last journey. There was the gathering of water, multiple times a day, from the public fountains or the canal banks, carried on the head in clay jugs, sometimes for considerable distances. There was the washing of clothes, beaten on stones at the canal edges, rinsed in the cold water, hung to dry in the sun. There was the cleaning of the house, swept every morning, swept again in the evening, kept obsessively neat. There was the tending of the small kitchen garden, where chilies and tomatoes and herbs grew. There was the care of the small animals, the dogs being fattened for the table, the turkeys in their pen. There was the gathering of greens from the fields, and herbs from the hillsides, and small fish from the lake when the season allowed. There was the care of children, always, constantly. A typical Aztec woman might bear 7, 8, 9 children in her lifetime, of whom 3 or 4 might survive to adulthood. The infant mortality was terrible. The diseases of childhood swept through the houses regularly. The babies died often, and the women buried them often in small graves near the houses, with small offerings of corn and flowers. The grief was constant in the lives of women. The mothers learned, slowly, to carry their dead in their hearts, alongside the living children whose feeding and care and watching never stopped. There was the care of the elders, the grandmothers, who in old age could no longer grind or weave with much strength, were honoured but also cared for by the younger women. They were given the soft tortillas. They were given the warmest place by the fire. They were dressed with help when their hands grew shaky. They were carried, sometimes, when they could no longer walk. The Aztec woman in the prime of her life, between 30 and 50, often cared for her own children, her own husband, her own elderly mother or father or both, and sometimes the orphaned children of relatives who had died. The house was full. The work was endless. The day began before dawn and ended only with sleep. And through all of this, the woman was expected to be quiet, calm, patient, modest. The Aztec ideal of womanhood, as preserved in the painted books and in the speeches that mothers gave to their daughters, was an ideal of quiet endurance. A woman, the elders said, should not speak loudly. She should not laugh too freely. She should not show anger. She should not raise her voice to her husband, even if she had cause. She should not gossip. She should not idle. She should not, above all, ever appear lazy. The Huitlatoli, the ancient sayings of the elders, contain long speeches that fathers and mothers were expected to give to their daughters as they grew into womanhood. These speeches have been preserved by the early Spanish chroniclers, who collected them from the old people of the empire after the conquest. They are remarkable documents. They are tender in places. They are stern in places. They are full of practical advice and full of deep philosophy and full of the slow, patient teaching of how to be a good woman in this difficult world. A father might say to his daughter, "My beloved daughter, my dove, my precious necklace, listen carefully, take in my words. I will tell you what your life must be. You must rise before the sun. You must light the fire. You must sweep the house. You must put on your good face. Do not show your moods. Do not let your husband see you angry. Do not let your children see you discouraged. Be strong, my daughter. Be strong. The world will be hard for you. The work will be long. But you must do it with a quiet heart and a calm face, because that is what holds the family together. Your peace will be the peace of the house. Your sadness, if you show it, will become the sadness of everyone, so hide your sadness. Keep your peace, and do your work." And a mother might say, "My little daughter, listen, I gave birth to you. I held you. I nursed you. Now I must teach you. Watch the women of our house. See how they walk, they do not run. See how they speak, they do not shout. See how they sit, they do not sprawl. See how they look, they do not stare. The good woman walks with her eyes lowered. modestly, like a beautiful bird walking quietly through the grass. The good woman speaks softly, like the gentle rain. The good woman works without complaining, like the river that flows day and night without ever stopping. Be like the river, my daughter. Be like the rain. Be like the quiet bird in the morning. This is the way of the woman. This is your path. These speeches were given again and again throughout a girl's childhood and adolescence. The mothers and grandmothers and aunts repeated them, slowly building, in the girl's mind, the shape of what she should become. The ideal woman of the Aztec Empire was, in many ways, an ideal of invisibility, of usefulness without being noticed, of constant work done with a calm face, of strength expressed not in loud words or bold actions, but in the quiet endurance of a life that asked a great deal, and gave back, in its visible rewards, very little. Now, dear listener, you may be wondering, did this work? Did the Aztec girls truly become these quiet, modest, endlessly working ideals? Or did they, like girls in every culture, in every time, sometimes rebel, sometimes resist, sometimes dream of other lives? The answer, as far as the chronicles tell us, is complicated. Most girls did become, in their visible behaviour, what their elders demanded. The training was thorough, it began early, it was constant. The punishments for disobedience, while often gentle in early years, became sharp as the girls grew older. A teenage girl who flirted with boys was punished severely. A girl who failed in her household work was beaten. A girl who spoke disrespectfully to her elders was struck on the mouth, and in severe cases the Magi thorns were used, the long sharp spines of the agave drawn across the offending tongue to draw blood. These punishments were not unusual, they were considered normal. They were considered necessary for the proper shaping of a woman. But beneath the surface there was of course more. The painted books and the chronicles, when read carefully, give us glimpses of women who did not fit the ideal. There were women who quarrelled with their husbands, sometimes loudly, sometimes for years. There were women who left their families, who ran away, who lived as outcasts in the margins of the cities. There were women who fell in love outside of marriage, who took lovers, who paid the heavy price of discovery, sometimes with death. There were women who became prostitutes, the atonim, who lived a strange and dangerous existence in the warrior quarters of the city, painted and perfumed, despised and desired, serving the unmarried warriors, and then being cast aside in their later years. There were women who became drunkards, despite the strict laws, hiding their pulque and drinking in secret. There were women who, in moments of despair, killed their own infants, and were then themselves killed by the priests. There were women who poisoned their husbands. There were women who poisoned themselves. There were, in short, women who did what women have always done, in every empire and every age. They lived their human lives, with all their messiness and pain, beneath the surface of the official ideal that the elders preached to them. And there were, also, the rare women who broke through the boundaries entirely. We must speak of these, because they are part of the story too. There were the priestesses. Yes, the Aztecs had priestesses. They were not as numerous as the priests, and they had less power, but they existed. They were associated with certain goddesses, especially Tonantzin, the mother goddess, and Coatlicue, the goddess of the earth, and Xochiquetzal, the goddess of flowers and love. The priestesses had their own quarters in some of the temples. They wore special clothes. They performed certain rituals, especially those connected with childbirth, with women's illnesses, with the planting and harvesting of corn, with the festivals of the female gods. They were celibate for the most part during their years of service. They were respected, and they had within their narrow sphere real authority. They were perhaps the only women in the empire who held religious power. There were the midwives, as we have said, who held a privileged position in society. The best midwives were known throughout the city. They were called to the births of noble women. They were paid in cacao and cloth and small gifts. They had their own knowledge, passed from one generation to the next, of herbs and prayers and techniques that no man knew. They were, in a quiet way, keepers of one of the deepest mysteries of the empire. There were the healers. The Aztec people had many kinds of healers, and a significant number of them were women. There were women who specialized in the diseases of children, women who knew the herbs for fever, women who could set broken bones, women who treated the wounds left by the obsidian blades of war. These healers had long training, often beginning as apprentices to their mothers or aunts. They had their own bags of herbs, their own collections of stones and shells with which they performed certain rituals, their own quiet knowledge that the official priest sometimes consulted and sometimes condemned, depending on the moment. There were the market women. The great market of Tlatelolco, which we visited in our first journey, was filled with women. Many of the sellers were women, many of the buyers. Some women became wealthy merchants in the markets, selling their goods, accumulating cacao beans and cotton cloth, growing prosperous over time. These market women had their own world, their own networks, their own quiet power. They knew everyone. They saw everything. They were among the few common women in the empire who moved freely outside their own neighborhoods, who traveled to other markets, who built lives that extended beyond the walls of a single small house. There were the entertainers. The Aztecs had professional singers and dancers, and many of them were women. They performed at festivals, at the courts of the nobles, at the great public ceremonies. They had their own costumes, their own training, their own status. They were respected for their skill, though their social position was complex, sometimes overlapping with that of the prostitutes, sometimes elevated above it. The line between honored performer and dishonored woman was, in this culture, as in many others, sometimes thin and sometimes invisible. And there were, very rarely, the women of the noble class who exercised real political power. We must remember that the Aztec Empire was, in its visible structure, deeply patriarchal. The emperor was always a man, the high priests were almost always men, the generals were men, the judges were men, the council of elders was almost entirely male. The women of the noble class were expected to marry well, to bear noble children, to manage their households, to weave their fine cloths, and to remain in public in the background. But behind the curtain, in the inner rooms of the palaces, there were women who shaped policy. The wives and mothers of emperors had influence, sometimes great influence. The Aztec emperors often had multiple wives, sometimes dozens, with a chief wife who held special status. These chief wives had their own households, their own attendants, their own networks of influence. They received foreign ambassadors. They advised their husbands. They sometimes, in moments of crisis, made decisions that shaped the empire. Their stories have been preserved only in fragments, but the fragments are tantalizing. The chief wife of Moctezuma II, the emperor who would meet the Spanish, is said to have warned him against trusting the strangers from across the sea. He did not listen. The empire fell. Whether her warning could have saved them, we will never know, but she gave it, and it has been remembered. There was, in the Aztec memory, a particular figure that I must tell you about, a woman whose name was Atotagili. She was a princess of the royal house, the daughter of one emperor and the mother of another, and, according to some sources, she ruled briefly between the two reigns, as the Queen of Tenochtitlan. For perhaps a year or two, possibly a little longer, this woman sat on the throne of the empire. The chronicles are unclear about exactly how this happened, and some historians have doubted whether it really did happen, but there are references in the painted books, references that seem to suggest that yes, there was once an Aztec queen who ruled, briefly, in her own right. And if this is true, she is one of the rarest figures in all of Mesoamerican history. A woman alone on the throne. In a world that gave women so little of their own, there is another figure, much more famous, whom we must speak of, although she belongs, in some ways, to the end of our story, not the middle. Her name was Malintzin. The Spanish called her La Malinche. She was an Aztec or Aztec-related noblewoman, born to a high family, but sold into slavery as a child after her father died and her mother remarried. She was given by her new owners, eventually, to the Spanish conquistadors when they arrived on the coast. She spoke Nahuatl, the language of the Aztecs, and she quickly learned Spanish. She became the translator for Hernán Cortés. She walked beside him through the entire conquest. She bore him a son. She was, in some ways, one of the most powerful figures in the destruction of the Aztec Empire. She is remembered today with great ambivalence in Mexico. Some call her a traitor, some call her a victim, some call her, more carefully, a survivor, a woman trying to live through impossible circumstances, using the few tools she had. Her name today has become a Spanish word, malinchista, used to describe someone who prefers foreign things over their own culture. It is a heavy legacy, and she did not choose any of it. She was a slave, she was taken, she lived, she did what she had to do, and she has been remembered for 500 years in ways that she could never have imagined. But these are the exceptions. A Totodsley, possibly a queen. Malintzin, the translator, the high priestesses, the midwives, the market women. These were the women whose names sometimes reached the chronicles, who had stories large enough to be remembered. The vast majority of Aztec women, the millions of common women who lived and died in the small houses, never had their names recorded at all. They are silent, dear listener, completely silent. We have, from all those millions of lives, almost no individual voices, no diaries, no letters, no poems with names attached. They lived, they worked, they suffered, they loved, they died, and the great silence of history closed over them. We have spoken of corn, of beans, of squash, of chili, of tomato, of avocado, of all the vegetables and greens. But what of meat? What of protein? What did the Aztec common people eat that was not a plant? This, dear listener, is where the story becomes most surprising. The Aztecs had no cattle. They had no sheep. They had no goats. They had no pigs. They had no chickens. None of these animals existed in this part of the world before the Spanish arrived. The only large mammals were deer in the forests and an animal called the peccary, a kind of wild pig native to the Americas. And these were hunted, but they were not common food. They were rare. They were difficult to catch. They were eaten on special occasions. The only domesticated animals the Aztecs had were the dog and the turkey. And both of them, dear listener, they ate. The dog was a particular breed called the Xoloitzcuintli, or sometimes shortened to Xolo. It was a small, hairless dog with a dark grey or pink skin and a slim, athletic build. The Aztecs raised these dogs in their houses. They were not pets in the way we think of pets. They were food animals. They were fattened on a diet of corn and table scraps, and when they reached the right size, they were slaughtered and cooked. The meat was considered a delicacy. It was rich, the chroniclers say, fatty, a little like pork, served at feasts, given to honoured guests. The Xolo dogs were also sometimes sacrificed at funerals to accompany the dead person on the journey to the underworld. But mostly they were eaten, with chili, in stews, roasted over the fire. This, of course, will be strange to many modern listeners. The idea of raising and eating dogs is one of the great cultural differences between our world and the Aztec world. But it is worth remembering, dear listener, that the Aztecs had very few options for animal protein. They did what they had to do. They raised the animals available to them. And the small, hairless, fattened dog was, for them, simply a food animal, like a chicken to us, or a goat. It was not a friend, it was not a companion, it was dinner, and it was good. The turkey was the other domesticated animal. The Aztecs called it huex alutl for the male, and totalin for the female. These birds were raised in great numbers. They were kept in courtyards. They were fed corn. They grew fat and large. The meat was much loved. It was roasted. It was stewed. It was made into a deep dark sauce called mole, which is still, today, perhaps the most famous dish in Mexican cuisine. The mole of the Aztecs was made with chilies, with chocolate, with seeds, with spices, with a slow, patient cooking that lasted hours. The turkey was simmered in this sauce until it was tender. It was served at the great feasts. It was, for the common people, an extraordinary luxury. A meal of turkey mole on a festival day was something a family might remember for years. The metatates are silent. The clay pots are at rest in their corners. And somewhere, far off, almost too quiet to hear, an old woman is singing the last verse of a corn-grinding song that her own grandmother taught her, in a language that is older than the empire itself, in words that mean more or less, sleep, my children, sleep. The corn is ground, the bread is made, the gods are fed, and tomorrow, slow and patient as always, we will begin it all again. There were also smaller animals. The Aztecs ate iguanas, the large reptiles of the warmer regions, which were hunted in the forests. They ate snakes, including the rattlesnake, whose meat was said to be like fish. They ate armadillos, which they roasted in their own shells. They ate rabbits, both wild and partly domesticated. They ate the small spotted deer that lived in the forests near the lakes. They ate various kinds of waterfowl, especially ducks, which they hunted with bows and arrows from canoes on the Great Lake of Texcoco. The ducks of the lake, in fact, were so numerous that the Aztecs had developed special techniques for catching them. They would weave together large mats of reeds and float them on the water, slowly approaching the flocks of ducks from below. The ducks would land on the floating mats, thinking them to be solid islands, and the hunters, hidden underneath, would grab the ducks by their legs and pull them down into the water. A single morning's work on the lake could provide ducks for many families. They ate fish. The lake of Texcoco was full of small fish, which were caught in nets. There was a fish called the acosil, a kind of small freshwater crayfish, which the Aztecs gathered in great quantities. There were small white fish, which they ate fresh or dried in the sun. There were tadpoles, which were considered a treat. There were frogs, large and small, eaten whole, sometimes roasted, sometimes in stews. And there was, dear listener, the food of the lake itself. Let me tell you about this, because it is, perhaps, the strangest and most fascinating food in the entire Aztec diet. It is the food that surprised the Spanish more than almost anything else they found. The food they could not understand. The food they thought was at first some kind of trick. It was a kind of algae, a blue-green algae called spirulina by modern scientists, which grew thickly on the surface of the lake. The Aztecs called it teculatl, which means, more or less, the excrement of the stone, a strange name for what was, in fact, one of the most nutritious foods in the world. The algae was harvested from the lake using fine nets. It was dried in the sun. It was formed into thin cakes, like small green bricks. And it was eaten with tortillas, often with chili. The taste, the chroniclers said, was a bit like cheese. It was sold in the markets in large quantities. It was a staple food, especially in the poorer neighborhoods. What the Aztecs did not know, of course, was that this algae was one of the most nutrient-dense foods on Earth. Pound for pound, more protein than meat, more iron than spinach, more vitamins than almost any vegetable. The Lake of Texcoco, by some quiet miracle of geography and climate, produced this rich green food in such abundance that the people of Tenochtitlan could eat it every day. And they did, for centuries. The algae helped to feed the empire. It made up in part for the lack of large meat animals. It kept the people strong and healthy. And then, after the conquest, the lake was drained. Slowly, over centuries, the great lake of Texcoco disappeared. The city of Mexico, which now sits in its bed, no longer has a lake at all, and the algae, which had fed millions, was gone. Lost. Forgotten for hundreds of years. Until modern science rediscovered it, and now sells it in expensive bottles in health food stores, never knowing, often, that the Aztec common people had been eating it from clay bowls with their warm tortillas in their small houses by the lake for 1,500 years. And there were the insects. Yes, dear listener, we must speak about the insects. The Aztecs ate insects, many kinds, and they did not consider this strange. They considered it normal. They considered it good. Insects were a major source of protein in the Aztec diet, especially for the common people who could not afford much meat. And there were many varieties. There were grasshoppers, called chapulines, which were caught in great numbers during certain seasons when they swarmed across the fields. They were toasted on the comal with a little chili and lime and eaten by the handful. Salty, crunchy, a little like roasted nuts. They were sold in the markets in cloth bags. They were given to children as treats. They were ant eggs. The Aztecs called them Eskimos. These were the eggs and larvae of certain large ants that built their nests in the agave plants. The harvesting was difficult. The harvesters had to dig into the nests, brushing off the angry adult ants, gathering the white eggs into baskets. But the result was a delicate buttery food, often called the caviar of the desert. It was, and still is, a prized delicacy. The Aztec common people did not eat it often. It was too rare, but on special occasions, in years of good harvest, the ant eggs might appear on the table, and they would be savoured. There were the larvae of the maguey plant. The maguey, the great agave, was a plant of many gifts. From its leaves came the fibre for clothing, from its sap came the pulque drink, and from its heart, sometimes, came small white worms, the larvae of certain moths and weevils. These worms were considered again a delicacy. They were eaten fresh, dropped briefly into boiling water, sometimes ground into pastes. They are still eaten today, in some parts of Mexico, as the famous gusano de maguey. There were water beetles, gathered from the surface of the lake. Their eggs, called macehualtin, were collected in nets, dried, and eaten like a kind of caviar. There were dragonfly nymphs. There were various beetles. There were the cochinilla, the small insects that lived on the cactus, which were not only eaten, but also used to make a brilliant red dye, valuable enough that they were collected as tribute from conquered provinces. The Aztec common people, in short, ate insects regularly, and the insects were, in many ways, an ideal food. They were full of protein, they were full of fat, they were easy to gather, easy to prepare, easy to store. They cost little, they were available almost year-round. They allowed a people without cattle, without pigs, without large protein sources, to still build strong bodies, to raise healthy children, to do the hard work that the empire demanded. And now let us speak of one more food, the most precious perhaps, the food that was, at the same time, a drink, a medicine, a money, a sacred substance, a gift from the gods. Chocolate. The Aztecs called it cacahuatl, or sometimes zocolot, which means more or less bitter water. From this Aztec word we get our word chocolate, and cacao, the name of the bean, is also from the Aztec language, almost unchanged across 5 centuries. Chocolate in the Aztec world was not the sweet candy we know today. It was a drink. A bitter, thick, frothy drink, made from ground cacao beans, mixed with water, flavored with chili, with vanilla, with annatto for color, sometimes with honey, sometimes with corn flour for thickness. It was beaten with a wooden whisk until it was foamy on top. It was served in small clay cups, painted in bright designs. But chocolate, in the common world of the Aztec people, was extremely rare. The cacao bean did not grow in the cold highlands of Tenochtitlan. It grew far to the south, in the hot lowlands near the coast, in the lands of the Maya and the other tropical peoples. Cacao had to be carried on the backs of porters for hundreds of miles. By the time it reached the great city, it was extraordinarily valuable. A handful of cacao beans could buy a small slave. A few beans could buy a turkey. A single bean might pay for a tamale or a small meal in the market. Cacao was in fact the money of the empire. The little dark beans, dried and counted, served as currency. And so, for the common people, drinking chocolate was almost impossible. The nobles drank it. The priests drank it. The great warriors, after a successful campaign, were sometimes given chocolate as part of their reward. The emperor himself, the chroniclers tell us, drank 50 cups of chocolate a day, served to him in golden goblets, mixed with rare spices, drunk with great ceremony. But the common farmer, the common weaver, the common porter, would taste chocolate perhaps a few times in his life, on the day of his wedding, on the day a child was born, on a great festival, once, twice, maybe 3 times in a long lifetime. And these rare cups would be remembered, spoken of years later, the taste, the warmth, the strange feeling of energy and joy that came from the dark, bitter drink. A small, beautiful luxury, lifted briefly into the lives of people who lived almost entirely on corn and beans and chili. There were drinks beyond chocolate. There was atol, which we have already spoken of, the warm corn-based drink that began most mornings. There was pulque, the fermented sap of the maguey plant, mild in alcohol, served only to the old, and only on certain days, since drunkenness was a capital offence. There was simple water, drawn from the great aqueduct that brought fresh water from the springs of Chapultepec. There were teas made from herbs, especially in winter when colds and chest illnesses spread through the city. There was a drink called tejate, made from corn and cacao and certain seeds, an old drink of the southern regions. There were drinks of fruit. There were drinks of seeds. There were dozens of small, careful preparations for different times and different needs. But the common drink, the everyday drink, was water, plain, cool, from the clay jugs that sat in the corner of every house. Now let us think, dear listener, about a typical day's eating. For a common Aztec family, in a normal year, with no festival, no special occasion, no particular celebration, just a quiet, ordinary day. The morning began with atol, warm corn drink, perhaps flavoured with a little honey, perhaps with a few seeds, drunk from a small clay cup, maybe a tortilla, dipped in the atole. This was breakfast, simple, quick, eaten while the women were already grinding for the larger meals to come. In mid-morning, a small snack, perhaps a tortilla folded around some beans, perhaps a handful of toasted grasshoppers, perhaps a piece of fruit, if the season allowed. A few minutes of rest, a few sips of water, and then back to work. The main meal of the day came in the early afternoon. This was the largest meal. The family gathered. The women had been preparing. There were tortillas, freshly cooked. There were beans, simmered all morning in their clay pot. There were chilies, ground into a paste with tomato and salt. There were greens, gathered from the fields or the kitchen garden. There might be a few small fish from the lake, dried or fresh. There might be some toasted grasshoppers, or a handful of Eskimos if it was the season. There might very rarely be a piece of dog meat or turkey if the family was wealthy or if there was a special occasion. The meal was eaten sitting on reed mats on the floor. There were no plates of the kind we know. Food was scooped from common bowls, with the tortillas serving as both spoon and bread. The family ate slowly. The children ate first, often. The elders ate with dignity. There was little conversation. Aztec families did not chatter during meals. Eating was a serious matter, a sacred matter in some ways. The food was the gift of the gods, and to eat it without reverence was, in a small way, an insult. In the evening, a lighter meal, tortillas again, perhaps some beans left over from the afternoon, perhaps a little of the spirulina algae from the lake in its small green cakes, a bowl of warm atoll perhaps, a few sips of water, and then as the sun set and the city quieted, the family settled in for the night. This was the daily eating of the common Aztec family, mostly corn, mostly beans, mostly chili and vegetables, some insects, some fish, very little meat, very rare chocolate, plain water, eaten on the floor, eaten with the hands, eaten in quiet reverence for the gifts of the gods. And the question is, was it a good diet? The answer, dear listener, is yes. Remarkably yes. Modern nutritionists, looking back at the Aztec common diet, are often astonished at how complete it was. The combination of corn and beans provided all the essential amino acids the body needs. The nixtamalization process unlocked the niacin in the corn. The chilies provided vitamin C and many other nutrients. The greens and vegetables filled in the rest. The insects added high-quality protein and fats. The fish added iodine and omega-3. The spirulina algae was a complete food in itself. The diet was low in saturated fat, high in fiber, rich in vitamins and minerals, and provided plenty of energy for hard physical work. The Aztec common people, when they had enough to eat, were among the healthiest people in the world at that time. Taller, on average, than European peasants. Stronger, with better teeth, with clearer skin. The diet, simple as it was, worked. But here, dear listener, we must come to the other side of the story. Because we have spoken of what the Aztecs ate in normal times. We have spoken of the daily meals, the small joys, the careful preparations of corn and bean and chili. We have spoken of abundance in a quiet, common way. But the empire was not always in abundance, and the lives of the common people were not always full of food. There were hungers, there were famines, there were long years when the rains did not come, when the corn did not grow, when the floating gardens did not produce, when the lake fish became scarce, when the great storehouses of the empire began to empty. There were years when the common people of Tenochtitlan watched their children grow thin, when the cheekbones of the old people began to show through the skin, when the smell of cooking in the courtyards became thinner and thinner day by day. The greatest of these famines, the one that the chroniclers remember most, was the Great Famine of 1454. It lasted in its worst form for 3 years. The rains failed, the corn died in the fields, the lake fish somehow became scarce. The greens did not grow. The animals of the forest, hunted desperately, were soon exhausted. The storehouses of the empire, which had been built precisely for such years, were drained, and the common people began to starve. The chronicles tell us heartbreaking stories from those years. Parents selling their children into slavery to other families, to other regions, simply so the children would be fed. Mothers walking miles with their babies to beg for food at distant temples. Old people quietly leaving their houses at night, walking into the fields and lying down so as not to consume the family's last scraps. Bodies in the streets, bodies in the canals, the smell of death mixing with the smell of empty cooking fires. The emperor of the time, a great ruler named Moctezuma I opened the imperial storehouses to the people. He gave away corn, beans, and salt to the starving. He sent expeditions to distant regions to buy food. He organized aid as best he could, but the famine was too great. Tens of thousands died. The population of the empire was reduced. Whole villages in the outer provinces were emptied. The bones of the dead in some places were piled in caves because there was no one with strength enough to bury them. And out of this great famine, the Aztec people learnt something. They learnt that the gods could be cruel, that the rain could fail, that the corn could die, that even the great empire, with all its temples and warriors and tribute, could be brought, in a single bad year, to the edge of destruction. And they learnt to fear the next drought, to fear the next failed harvest, to fear the next year when the storehouses might empty. After the great famine, the empire intensified its religious practices. The blood offerings increased. The festivals became more elaborate. The priests called for greater and greater devotion. The Aztec leaders had come to believe that the famine had been caused by the anger of the gods, and that the only way to prevent another one was to feed the gods more, to honor them more, to offer them more. This was the beginning, in some ways, of the great increase in human sacrifice that would come to define the later empire. The hunger of the people had been so terrible and so frightening that the priests believed only the great and constant feeding of the gods could keep it away. And so, in some quiet and terrible way, the food of the empire and the blood of the empire became connected. The tortillas on the floor of the common house and the captives walking up the temple steps, both of them in the Aztec mind were part of the same great cycle. The gods gave the rain, the gods gave the corn, the gods gave the harvest, and the humans in return gave back what they could: their work, their devotion, their tortillas placed at the small house altars, and, when the priests called for it, their blood. This is the deep truth of Aztec food, dear listener. It was not just sustenance, it was theology. Every kernel of corn was a small piece of the body of the gods. Every cup of atol was a kind of prayer. Every meal eaten on the floor of a small house was a quiet communion with the great unseen forces that had given the gift, and that might, if angered, take it away. The common woman, kneeling at her metate, grinding her family's daily corn, was not just preparing food. She was, in a quiet way, participating in the deepest religious act of her culture. Her work was holy. Her bent back, her calloused hands, her aching knees were the marks of a daily devotion that lasted, for most women, from the age of 8 until the day they died. She was the priestess of her own small kitchen. She was the keeper of the sacred grain. She was the one who turned the gift of the gods into the food of her family, and the family, eating together, in the late afternoon on the reed mats of the small house, was doing more than eating. They were renewing, with each meal, the long quiet bond between the human and the divine. They were saying, in the simple act of sharing tortillas and beans and chili, "We are still here. We are still grateful. The gift is still received." This was the heart of Aztec food. This was what gave it weight, beyond its calories and its proteins and its careful balance of nutrients. This was what made even the simplest meal a small sacred event. The empire fed itself, day by day, through the patient work of millions of women at their grinding stones, through the careful planting of the 3 sisters in the fields, through the gathering of the lake algae and the insects of the fields and the rare cups of chocolate brought from the south. And under all of it, like a deep slow river beneath the daily life, ran the conviction that food was a gift, a precious gift, a gift that could be taken away, a gift that had to be honored every day with the small reverence of careful eating. We who live in our time, dear listener, do not always remember this. We eat quickly, often. We eat alone, often. We eat without thinking much about where our food came from, or what it took to bring it to our table. We are blessed with abundance. We are blessed with variety. We are blessed in ways that the Aztec common people could not have imagined. And yet perhaps we have lost something, some small daily sense of the holiness of the meal, some quiet thankfulness for the daily gift. The Aztecs had this thankfulness. They had it in their bones. They had it in the way they bent down to pick up a fallen kernel of corn. They had it in the way they spoke to their food, in their prayers and their festivals. They had it in the slow, patient grinding of the metate, the careful tending of the chinampas, the gathering of the algae from the lake. They had it in everything they ate, and everything they grew, and everything they prepared, with their hands, in their small houses, by their small fires, in the great quiet city by the lake. Now, dear listener, the afternoon is fading. The family in our small house has finished its evening meal. The remaining beans have been covered. The last tortillas have been wrapped in a clean cloth. The clay pots have been rinsed with a little water. The metate has been put away in its corner. The fire is dying, glowing red and orange under a thin layer of ash. The children are stretching out on their mats. The grandmother is humming a soft old song, almost too quiet to hear. The father is sitting against the wall, his eyes half closed, his hands loose in his lap, allowing the long day to settle from his shoulders. Outside, the city is quieting. The smoke from 1,000 small fires is rising, thin and grey, into the evening sky. The lake is calm. The distant temples are dark against the last orange light of the sun. The drums have stopped. The streets are nearly empty. The day's eating, across the entire empire, is finished. And the night, soft and cool and full of quiet sounds, is beginning to settle, like a blanket, over the great city on the lake. Let your own breathing slow, dear listener, as the night settles. Let the smell of the corn and the chili and the slow fire fade gently in your mind. Let the sound of the grinding stone, that deep slow heartbeat of Aztec life, fade into the quiet. The empire is at rest. The metateats are still. The fires are banked. The food is put away. And in millions of small houses, across hundreds of miles of valley and mountain and lakeshore, the people are lying down on their reed mats, full and warm and quiet, surrounded by their families, with the soft taste of the day's last meal still on their lips. Tomorrow, the grinding will begin again in the cold, dark hour before the sun rises. The work will begin again. The careful, patient, beautiful work of feeding a people, of feeding an empire, of turning the gifts of the gods into the small daily miracle of warm bread and shared meals. But tonight, sleep. The day's work is done. The day's food has been eaten. The day's prayers have been made. The world has been kept alive for one more day by the slow, patient hands of women at grinding stones, by the careful labour of men in the fields, by the gathering of insects and algae and greens, by the small kindnesses of families sharing what they have. The empire has been fed. The cycle continues. And the great quiet night, deep and cool and gentle, is settling over all of it, like a soft cloth laid over the tools of the day, putting them away until the morning calls them out again. Rest now, dear listener, rest deeply. The kitchen fires of Tenochtitlan are dying out. This is in some ways the hardest part of the story to tell. The silence, the fact that we cannot know in any specific way what these women felt, what they dreamed of, what they thought about as they knelt at their grinding stones for hours every morning, year after year, decade after decade. We can imagine, we can guess, we can construct, from the few sources we have, a kind of composite picture. But we cannot truly hear them. They are gone. And the world they lived in, the world that bound them so tightly to their kitchens and their looms and their cradles and their grinding stones, that world is gone too. And yet, dear listener, let us imagine for a moment what one of those women might have felt. Let us sit in our minds beside her at the metet in the grey hours before dawn. Let us see what her morning was like. She wakes before her family, as she does every morning. She has slept perhaps 5 hours. Her back aches from the reed mat. Her shoulders are stiff. She is hungry, but there is no time to eat yet. She rises quietly, so as not to wake the children. She washes her face with cold water. She combs her long black hair quickly and ties it back. She wraps her houppelle and her skirt around herself, smoothing them. She steps out of the small room into the courtyard. The sky is just beginning to lighten. The stars are still visible, the very brightest ones, in the western part of the sky. The air is cold. She can see her breath. She walks to the small pile of firewood and gathers an armful. She kneels at the hearth in the corner of the courtyard, the small stone enclosure that holds the family's cooking fire. She blows gently on the embers from yesterday's fire, banked under ash. They glow red. She adds small twigs, then larger pieces. The flame catches. Slowly the fire builds. She heats a small pot of water. She drinks a cup of warm water, plain, slowly. This is her breakfast. She will not eat anything more until the family wakes and gathers for the morning meal, hours from now. She goes to the corn pot. She measures out enough kernels for the day, soaked overnight in lime water. She drains them. She carries them to the metate, which sits under a small woven shelter at the edge of the courtyard. She kneels on the woven mat that protects her knees, a little. She picks up the mano. She places it on the metate. She takes a deep breath, and she begins. Back and forth, back and forth. The corn crushes. The masa begins to form. Her shoulders move in a slow rhythm. Her hips against her heels ache in the familiar way. Her hands grip the mano firmly, but not too firmly, just as her mother taught her, just as her grandmother taught her mother. The work is automatic now. After 30 years, she no longer thinks about it. Her mind drifts. What does she think about, dear listener? In the long quiet hours of the morning grinding, what fills her mind? We do not know. We cannot know. But let us imagine. Let us imagine that she thinks of her children, the 2 who are alive, the 3 who are not. The little daughter who died of a fever when she was 2 years old, 6 summers ago. The little son who died at birth, a year after that. The little son who died of the coughing sickness last winter, just before his 5th birthday. 3 small graves in the corner of the courtyard, marked with small stones. She has not visited them today yet. She will, later, when the sun is up. She will leave a small piece of tortilla and a flower, if there is one. She does this every day. Let us imagine that she thinks of her husband. He is a good man, mostly. He works hard. He brings home what he earns. He does not beat her, except occasionally, when he has been drinking, on those rare festival days when older men are allowed pulque. He treats the children gently. They have in many ways a good marriage. They were not in love when they married. They were not asked. The match was arranged by their parents when she was 16 and he was 19. She did not see him until the wedding day. She remembers her terror then, her certainty that she could not bear to live with this strange man. And then, slowly, over the years, the strangeness wore off, and a kind of quiet companionship grew. And now she cannot quite imagine her life without him. They have been married 22 years. They will, if the gods are kind, be married many more. Let us imagine that she thinks of her mother, dead now for 4 years. A good woman, a kind woman. She thinks of her mother often. Her hands on the metate are her mother's hands. Her songs, when she sings them softly to her grandchildren, are her mother's songs. Her recipes for the chili paste, for the bean stew, for the tortilla dough, are her mother's recipes, passed down without writing, learnt by watching, learnt by doing, learnt by being beside her mother for decades, in this same small courtyard, in front of this same fire. Let us imagine that she thinks, sometimes, of larger things, of the gods, of the great temple, whose summit she can see from her courtyard, rising above the houses of the neighbourhood, of the priests, who walk in their black robes, terrifying and beautiful, of the great festivals, the festivals of the corn goddess, when she takes her children, dressed in their best clothes, to the temple square, and they offer flowers and small portions of tortillas at the foot of the statue, of the rain god Tlaloc, whom she prays to in the dry months, before the planting season, of the moon, which she watches sometimes, late at night when the children are asleep, and the moon hangs over the lake, and she feels for a moment something like peace. Let us imagine that she thinks very rarely of a different life, of what it might be like to be born a man, with the possibility of becoming a warrior, of seeing distant lands, of climbing the ladder of honour, of what it might be like to be born a noble, with servants to do the grinding, with fine cotton cloth for her body, with chocolate in the morning and turkey for dinner, of what it might be like to be free of children, free of husband, free of the constant demands of the household, with time, even just a single afternoon, to herself, to sit alone by the lake and watch the water and the birds. But these thoughts come rarely, and when they come, she pushes them away. They are not useful. They are in some quiet way dangerous. To think too much about other lives is to lose touch with the life you have. So she pushes the thoughts away. She returns her attention to the grinding, back and forth, back and forth. The masa is coming. Soon she can start patting out the tortillas. Soon the family will wake. Soon the day will begin in earnest. This, dear listener, was the life of millions of women across hundreds of years in this great empire that has now been gone for 5 centuries. A life of work, mostly. A life of waiting on others, mostly. A life of small joys, sometimes. A life of long sorrows, often. A life that was, in the eyes of the empire, useful, honourable and complete, even though it gave the woman herself very little of what we today might call a self. And yet, dear listener, we should not pity these women, or at least we should not pity them only, because they did not, by and large, see their lives as we might see them. They did not measure themselves by the standards of our time. They had their own measure, and by their own measure, many of them lived rich, full, meaningful lives. The Aztec woman, in her own understanding, was the center of the home. The home was the center of the world. Without her, nothing was possible. The warriors went to war on the food she had prepared. The priests performed their rituals in cloaks she had woven. The children of the empire grew up on the milk she had given them, on the tortillas she had patted out by hand, on the lullabies she had sung in the long quiet hours. Her work was not invisible. Her work was the foundation of everything. And she knew this. The elders told her this over and over in their long speeches. The midwives told her this when they spoke to her newborn daughters. The festivals reminded her of this when the corn goddess was honoured, and the women of the empire were celebrated as the keepers of the great life-giving grain. She also had often deep bonds with other women. The courtyards of the small houses were shared. The women ground together. They wove together. They went to the canal together. They gathered greens together in the fields. They raised their children together, watching over each other's babies, sharing the work of caring for the old. The friendship between Aztec women, the kind of slow daily companionship that came from years of working side by side, was, in its own way, one of the most precious things in their world. They were not alone. They had each other. They sang together. They laughed together, quietly, when the men were not around. They told each other stories. They held each other through the great sorrows of childbirth and the death of children. They were, in their own quiet way, a community, and they had, in many cases, deep religious lives of their own. The Aztec religion, while dominated by male gods like Quetzalcoatl and Tezcatlipoca, also had powerful female deities. The corn goddess, the earth goddess, the mother of the gods, the goddess of flowers, the goddess of women in childbirth. These goddesses were important to the women of the empire. They were prayed to, they were honored, they were spoken to, in the small altars in every house, where women lit copal incense and offered tortillas and small flowers. The female religion of the Aztecs, while less visible than the male religion of the temples and the warriors, was real, and it was deep, and it gave the women of the empire a sense of connection to something larger than themselves, larger than their daily work, larger than their small houses. And the Aztec woman had, in her old age, the great honor of becoming an elder. The old women of the empire, the abuelas, were respected figures. They had earned, through their decades of work and motherhood, a position of authority in their families and their communities. They were consulted. They were listened to. They sat in special places at the festivals. They were given soft foods, the best portions, the warmest seats by the fire. Their long white hair, their wrinkled hands, their bent backs were marks of honor. They had survived. They had endured. They had brought forth life, and they had buried much of it, and they had kept on. And now, in their final years, they could rest a little. They could hold their grandchildren on their laps. They could sing the old songs. They could fall asleep peacefully on their reed mats, knowing that their work was, finally, behind them. When such an old woman died, the family mourned deeply. She was washed with care. She was dressed in her best hupil, the one she had woven herself many years before. She was wrapped in fine cotton cloth, if the family had it. She was buried in the family courtyard, near the kitchen, near the grinding stone, near the place where her own umbilical cord had been buried at her birth. The Aztecs believed that the souls of women who had lived good lives, like the souls of warriors who had died in battle, went to a special paradise. The warriors went to the eastern sky, where they accompanied the sun on its morning rise. The women, perhaps surprisingly, went to the western sky, where they accompanied the sun on its evening descent. They became, in death, the partners of the sun. They had spent their lives bringing light into the world in the form of bread and children and woven cloth. And now they walked with the great light itself, into the west, into the long blue evening, into the gentle place beyond. There was also a special honor, perhaps the highest honor available to an Aztec woman, that came to those who died in childbirth. These women, the Aztecs believed, had died in battle. They had fought in their own way just as fiercely as any warrior. They had given their lives just as nobly, and their souls went to a special place called the Cihuatlampa, the region of women, where they joined the souls of warriors and rode with the sun across part of the sky. The Aztecs called these women the Cihuateteo, the divine women. They were honored at certain festivals. Their bodies, after burial, were said to have special power, so much so that families had to guard the graves for several days to prevent thieves from stealing the bones, which were considered magical. A woman who died in childbirth was, in the Aztec mind, transformed. She had not failed. She had triumphed. She had given the gods her blood, just as a warrior would, and she had earned her place among the divine. This is the strangest and most beautiful aspect of the Aztec view of women, perhaps, that childbirth itself was a kind of war, that the woman in labor was, in those long terrible hours, a warrior on a battlefield, that her pain was holy, that her risk was sacred, that if she lived, she had defeated her enemy and brought forth a new soul into the empire, and that if she died, she had fallen honorably and joined the company of the gods. The Aztec midwife, when she attended a birth, spoke to the woman in this language. She called the woman a warrior She used military terms for the contractions, for the pushing, for the final emergence of the child. The birth chamber was, in its way, a battlefield. The midwife was a general. The mother was the soldier. The baby was the captive, taken from the other world and brought into the human one. The whole event was reframed by the language of the empire into something heroic, something noble, something worthy of the gods. We do not know whether this language helped the women who laboured. Some surely were comforted by it. Some, perhaps, felt the strength of being called a warrior, of being told that their pain mattered, that their suffering was sacred. Others, perhaps, were too far gone in pain to hear the words at all. They simply endured, as women have always endured, the long, terrible work of bringing new life into the world. And many of them died. The death rate in childbirth in the Aztec world was high, higher than in our time, immeasurably so. A woman who bore 8 or 9 children, as many did, had a real chance of dying in one of those births. Some calculations suggest that 1 in 10 Aztec women died in childbirth or its complications. The midwives did their best. They had their herbs, their prayers, their long experience. But sometimes the labour was too long, the bleeding too much, the baby too large, the mother too weak, and the woman died. And the family buried her, and honoured her, and told her children that she had become a goddess, that she rode now with the sun across the western sky, that she was watching them from a place of light. Whether this helped the children, we do not know. They grew up motherless, often. They were raised by aunts, by grandmothers, by older sisters. The grief was real, the loss was real. The mother was gone, no matter how beautiful the story about her journey to the divine. And so, dear listener, this was the life of the Aztec woman, a life of work, beginning before she could remember, a life of children, born and lost and raised, a life of marriage, often arranged, sometimes happy, sometimes not, a life of weaving and grinding and gathering and cooking and washing and sweeping and tending and serving for 50 or 60 or 70 years, until the body could give no more. A life that was honoured in its own way by its own culture, even as it was bound and constrained by laws and customs that we today would find unbearable. A life that produced alongside its suffering deep bonds, real friendships, sacred work, and a quiet beauty that lives, still, in the bones of the women who descended from these ancestors, and who walk today through the markets of modern Mexico, still grinding corn, still weaving cloth, still carrying on, in small ways, the long quiet tradition of the women of Tenochtitlan. Let us now, slowly, end our journey. Let us return, one last time, to the small house at the edge of the great city. The night has fallen, the fire is dying, the children are asleep on their reed mats, curled together for warmth. The husband is asleep, his arm thrown over his face. The grandmother is asleep, her old hands folded across her chest, breathing softly. The woman, the one we have been imagining all this time, is the last to lie down. She always is. She has banked the fire, she has put the food away, she has checked the children, one last time. She has wiped down the metate. She has folded the day's woven cloth, the small piece she managed to complete during the brief moments she had between other tasks. And now, finally, she lies down on her own mat. She pulls her thin blanket around her shoulders. She closes her eyes. She has done her work. Today, like every day, she has done what she was born to do. The corn has been ground. The tortillas have been made. The family has been fed. The cloth has been woven. The children have been cared for. The house has been kept. The fire has been tended. The gods have been honoured with small offerings in the quiet hours of the morning. Everything that needed to be done has been done. Tomorrow she will wake before the sun. She will do it all again. She will kneel at the grinding stone. She will pat out tortillas. She will spin and weave. She will care for her family. She will sweep and clean and gather and prepare. She will wear the same hupil, mended carefully along the seams. She will speak softly. She will work without complaining. She will be as her mother was, and her grandmother was, and her great-grandmother was, the quiet centre of the small world of her house. And one day, many years from now, she will die, perhaps in childbirth, like so many others, perhaps in old age, surrounded by grandchildren, with the long white hair spread on the reed mat, perhaps in some sudden illness, in middle age, leaving her family to mourn her, perhaps in the great cataclysm that is coming, the strangers from across the sea, the diseases that will sweep through the empire, the conquest that will end the world that her ancestors built. We do not know how she will die. We do not know when. But we know that she will be remembered, in some small way, by her descendants. Her name may not be written in any book. Her face may not be carved in any stone. Her voice may not be preserved in any chronicle. But her work will live in the bodies of her children and her grandchildren, in the songs they sing, in the recipes they pass on, in the strength of their hands at their own grinding stones, in the patience of their own backs at their own weaving looms. She will live, dear listener, in the long quiet line of women who carried, generation after generation, the great heavy work of keeping a civilization alive. And now, in our own quiet moment, lying in our own beds, in our own warm rooms, in our own time, we can perhaps for a few seconds hold her in our minds. This nameless woman of Tenochtitlan, this grandmother of half a continent, this silent hero of 1,000 mornings, 10,000 mornings, of patient work at the grinding stone. Let her rest now. Let her sleep. The fire in her courtyard is glowing low. The night is cool. The stars are wheeling slowly over the great city by the lake. The lake is still. The temples are dark. The drums are silent. The whole long day, the whole long world, the whole long empire is at rest. And we who have walked with her, we who have walked through the warrior houses and the markets and the kitchens and the canals, we who have spent these long hours together in the world of the Mexica, we too can rest now. Our journey is complete. The story is told. The day in the Aztec Empire is over. We have seen what their world was like. We have seen the great pyramid against the morning sun. We have heard the slow drum of the temple and the slow grind of the metate, both of them beating together day after day, holding up the world. We have walked through the market with our small handful of cacao beans. We have followed the boys to the warrior houses and the girls to the kitchens. We have eaten the simple foods of the common people. We have honoured the silent women whose work made everything else possible. And now the great city by the lake fades, gently, into the dream. The temples soften and grow distant. The canals shimmer one last time and then dissolve. The voices of the priests, the warriors, the women, the children fade into a long quiet hum and then into silence. You are back in your own bed, dear listener, wherever you are, in your own quiet room, with your own soft pillow and your own warm blanket. The journey is over. The night is yours. Sleep deeply. Sleep peacefully. Sleep with the gentle knowledge that you have walked, for a little while, in a world that was very different from your own, and that you have come back safely, and that the dreams that now wait for you can be anything at all. There are no metates to kneel at in your dreams. There are no temple steps to climb. There are no obsidian blades to fear. There is only the soft, gentle, endless night, holding you, holding all of us, holding even the long-lost city of Tenochtitlan in its quiet arms. Rest, my dear listener, rest. The empire is gone. The work is done. The fire is out. And the great long dream of history is sleeping beside us until morning. Good night. The warriors gather. They are blessed by the priests. They are given small bundles of food. dried tortillas, ground corn mixed with honey, beans, a little dried fish. They are given small water gourds. They are given their weapons, the macehualtin, the spear, the bow, the sling. They are given their shields brightly painted, their feather costumes if they belong to the great orders. And then they march. The marches were long. Mesoamerica is a land of mountains, of jungles, of deserts. To reach the lands of the Maya, far to the south, took weeks of walking. To reach the Tarascan kingdom, to the west, took many days. The warriors carried everything on their backs. They walked from dawn to dusk. They slept on the ground at night, wrapped in their cloaks, with one warrior on watch. They ate sparingly. They drank from the rivers. They moved through the land like a long, slow river of men, with the older warriors at the front, and the new Tlamani, the captors in waiting, in the middle, where they could be watched and protected. The battles themselves were often shorter than the marches. The Aztecs preferred to overwhelm their enemies quickly, with a great rush of warriors, with much noise, with the shrill cries of the eagle and the deep roars of the jaguar. They blew on conch shells, they beat on drums, they shouted. They wanted in part to terrify the enemy, to break the enemy's will before the fighting even began. And often it worked. Many small cities surrendered as soon as the Aztec army came into view. They sent out their elders, they begged for mercy, they offered tribute, and the Aztec generals sometimes accepted these surrenders, and the warriors marched on, having taken no captives but also having lost no men. But other times the enemy fought, and then the battle was real. The lines closed, the macehualtin swung, the obsidian flashed in the sun. Men fell, bleeding into the dust. Captives were taken, dragged behind the lines, bound with cords. The smell of the battle was a strange mix of sweat and blood and the dry dust of the trampled earth. The sound was a roar of voices, of weapons striking shields, of the cries of the wounded. The battle could last hours. Sometimes it lasted only minutes. When it was over, the warriors counted. They counted their dead. They counted their captives. They burned the bodies of the enemy dead, sometimes as an offering to their own gods, and then they marched home. The walk home was different from the walk out. The men were tired now. They were carrying their wounded. They were leading their captives. The young Tlamani, those who had taken their first prisoners, walked with pride, but also with the strange dazed look of men who have just done something they have trained for their entire lives. Some of them wept, quietly, on the march home, not from sadness, from something deeper, from the feeling of having crossed, in a single afternoon, from boyhood into manhood, from having become, at last, what their parents had given them to become. That day in the small house when the midwife had spoken to them and buried their wooden weapons. When the army returned to Tenochtitlan, there was a great procession. The warriors entered the city through one of the causeways. The people lined the streets, the drums beat, the conch shells sounded. The captives, in their wooden collars, walked behind the warriors. The emperor came out to greet the army at the central temple. The priests blessed the captives. There were songs, there were speeches, there were feasts, and then, in the following days, the ceremonies began. The captives were honoured, they were fed, they were dressed in fine clothes, and in time, on the appointed day of the festival, they walked up the steps of the great temple. And the warriors who had taken them stood at the bottom, watching, and the gift was completed, the blood was given, the son was fed, the cycle continued. This was the life of the Aztec warrior, from the buried wooden toys of his first day to the temple steps of his captives, from the cold mornings at the Telpucali to the long marches across the land, from the discipline of the practice club to the brotherhood of the warrior houses, from the philosophy of the flowers and the dreams to the obsidian blade and the dust of the battlefield. A life shaped every day by the empire, a life that asked of every man that he give up his own desires, his own fears, his own quiet wishes for a small and peaceful existence, and instead become a weapon, a weapon of stone and feather and bone, sharpened by the gods, swung by the empire, used and used and used, until the day it broke. Most of these men did not live long enough to grow old. Most died before 40, many before 30, some before 25. But those who did survive, those who somehow walked through battle after battle, through campaign after campaign, who had taken many captives, who had been blessed by the gods, who had risen to the highest ranks, these old warriors became something rare and precious in the empire. They became the teachers, the advisors, the wise old voices in the council chambers. They sat at the side of the emperor, they counselled the young men, they lived in the warrior houses, in their later years walking slowly with sticks, their feather costumes packed carefully away in cedar chests. Their long white hair was a sign of honour. Their many scars, the marks of every battle they had survived, were treated with the deepest respect. When they died, the funerals were great, the whole city mourned, the drums beat slowly for a full day, and the boys of the Telpocali, the young apprentices in the warrior houses, the new Tlamani sent to their first wars, all of them looked upon these old warriors with awe, because they knew, in their hearts, that to live so long in this world was to have done something almost impossible, to have been chosen again and again by the gods, and to have been spared, to have been called to the temple steps in one form or another, and to have come back. The old warriors were proof that, sometimes, the path of the warrior led not to early death, but to long life, not to the obsidian, but to the slow fading of age in a quiet bed. But this, of course, was the exception. For most, the path led to other endings, quieter endings, sadder endings, endings on a hot afternoon in a distant valley, with the dust rising and the conch shells fading and the world growing dim. Endings in the small houses, with the wound that would not close. Endings at the top of an enemy temple, with the wind in the hair and the strange, calm song rising from the throat one last time. These were the warriors of the empire. These were the men shaped, from babyhood, to give their lives for the gods. These were the eagles and the jaguars, the spears and the shields, the cotton armour and the obsidian blades. These were the men who built, on their backs and with their blood, the great empire of the Mexica. And these were the men who would, in time, when the strangers came from across the sea, fight one last great war. A war they did not understand. A war against horses and iron and gunpowder and disease. A war they would lose. A war that would end everything they had been trained to defend. But that is a story for another night. Tonight, in our quiet journey through this world, we have followed the long, slow shaping of the warrior, from the buried wooden toys to the brotherhood of the eagle, from the soft songs of the warrior houses to the dust of the long roads, from the discipline of the practice yard to the captive walking calmly to his fate. It is a hard story, dear listener, a heavy story, a story that asks a great deal of the heart, even now, even at this distance of 500 years, because we are watching, in this story, what humans can do to other humans. We are watching how a society can shape its children into weapons. We are watching how love and discipline and faith and fear can be woven together in the right way by patient priests and quiet fathers and silent teachers, until the result is a young man who walks calmly to his own death and sings while he does it. There is something in this story that frightens us, and there is something in this story that moves us, because we recognize in the Aztec warrior something of ourselves, the longing for honor, the fear of failure, the bond with our brothers, the need to believe that our suffering means something, the dream that somehow our small lives will matter to the gods, or to history, or to those who come after us. The warriors of Tenochtitlan believed all of these things, they lived them, they died for them, and they sang in their quiet houses that life was a dream and a flower and a passing moment. And now, dear listener, in our own quiet moment, in our own slow night, we have walked with them for a little while. We have seen what their lives were like. We have felt perhaps a small breath of what they felt. Let your eyes close, if they are not already closed. Let your breathing slow. Let your body settle deeper into wherever it is resting. The warriors are gone. The great houses are dust. The feather costumes are ashes. The obsidian blades, the ones that have survived, sit quietly in museums now, behind glass, with small labels in 2 or 3 languages, looked at by tourists who pass by quickly and do not stay. But the songs remain, a few of them, the slow chants about the flower and the dream, the songs that say we are here only briefly, only for a moment, only as dreams in the great sleep of the world. So sleep, dear listener, sleep deeply, sleep with the soft sound of those old songs somewhere in your mind, sleep with the image of feathers bright in the morning sun, sleep with the warriors of the eagle and the jaguar, who are at rest now, all of them, after their long and difficult journeys. Sleep with the knowledge that their dreams are over, and that you, in your safe and quiet place, are allowed to have your own dreams now, in a world that no longer asks you to climb temple steps or carry obsidian blades. The journey is not yet finished. There is still more to walk through in this strange and beautiful and terrible empire. We will sit soon at the simple meals of the common people. We will see what they ate in the long quiet months between harvests, and we will gently lift the cloth that has been drawn over the lives of the women of this world, whose voices have so rarely been heard. But for now, rest. The drum is silent, the marches are over. The old warriors are sleeping in their quiet houses, their long white hair spread on the reed mats, their scars hidden beneath their cloaks. The feather costumes hang in the cedar chests. The obsidian blades wait, quietly, in their wooden grooves. The campaigns are finished, the empire breathes, and the great city on the lake, in this moment of our dream, is at peace. Sleep, dear listener, sleep. Let us walk now, slowly, into a different part of the empire, not the warrior houses, not the temple steps, not the long roads of war. Let us walk, instead, into the small, quiet places where most of the people of this world actually lived. Into the houses of the common ones, the macehualtin, the farmers, the fishers, the weavers, the men and women who did not wear feathers, who did not carry obsidian blades, who did not climb the steps of the Great Pyramid. The men and women who simply lived, day after day, year after year, in this strange and beautiful and difficult land. And let us, in this part of our journey, look at the most ordinary thing in the world, the thing that every human, in every time and place, must do in order to live. Let us look at what these people ate. You may think, dear listener, that this is a small topic, a simple topic, a topic for a few minutes perhaps, but you would be wrong. The food of the Aztec common people is one of the great stories of the empire. It is a story of cleverness, of patience, of survival, of beauty, of hunger, of small joys and great sorrows. It is a story of plants and animals and insects and fungi. It is a story of fields and gardens and lakes and forests. It is a story of every morning, every noon, every evening, in millions of small houses across thousands of miles of land. It is the story of how an entire civilization fed itself for hundreds of years, without cattle, without wheat, without iron, without the wheel. It is perhaps the most surprising and the most quietly miraculous story in all of Aztec life. So come with me into a small house at the edge of Tenochtitlan. The morning is cool, the mist is rising off the canals. There is the sound of a woman kneeling on the earth floor, grinding corn on a flat stone. The sound has been going on in millions of houses across the empire since before the sun came up. The sound that is in many ways the true heartbeat of Aztec life. The slow, patient, endless grinding of corn. Because corn, dear listener, is the beginning. Corn is everything. Corn is the food. Corn is the gift. Corn is the body of the gods. The Aztecs called it scently, or sometimes clayey. It came in many colours: yellow, white, blue, red, black, speckled. The fields of the empire were patchworks of colour, depending on the season, depending on the variety. The Aztecs had been growing corn for thousands of years, longer than anyone could remember. The first corn, the very first, was the gift of the god Quetzalcoatl, who had transformed himself into an ant and crawled into the mountain where the secret grains were hidden, and brought one kernel back to humans. From that one kernel, all the corn of the world had grown. This is what the Aztecs believed. And so the corn was sacred, every kernel, every cob, every plant in every field. The Aztecs treated corn with a reverence that is hard for us to imagine today. If a kernel of corn fell on the ground, you picked it up, you did not step on it, you did not waste it. To waste corn was, in some quiet sense, an offence against the gods themselves. There is a story, recorded by the early Spanish chroniclers, of an Aztec elder who came across some corn kernels lying on the ground, and stopped, and bent down, and gathered every single one into his cloak. When asked why, he said, "What would the gods say to me if they came down and saw their gift lying in the dust, and I had walked past it without lifting it up? So I lifted it, as any man would." The corn was prepared in a particular way, a way that was, in its own quiet way, one of the great inventions of the ancient world. The Aztecs did not simply grind raw corn. They first treated it with lime water. They took the dried kernels and they boiled them, gently, in water mixed with a small amount of slaked lime, which they made by burning certain stones in a fire. This process, which we now call nixtamalization, did something extraordinary to the corn. It softened the kernels, it loosened the tough outer skin, it made the corn easier to grind, but it also, and this is the truly remarkable part, it released the nutrients in the corn, particularly the niacin, which is essential for human health. Without this process, a people who lived almost entirely on corn would have suffered terribly from a disease called pellagra, a disease that ravaged the poor of Europe and the American South in later centuries, who ate corn without knowing how to prepare it properly. But the Aztecs knew. They had known for thousands of years. They did not know the chemistry, of course. They did not know about niacin. They knew only that the corn, treated this way, made stronger and healthier people. And so they did it. In every house, every day, without fail. After the corn was boiled and softened, it was ground. And this, dear listener, is where the long, patient work of the Aztec woman truly began. The grinding stone was called a metate. It was a large flat stone, slightly curved, set on 3 small legs. The woman knelt before it. She placed a handful of the softened corn on the stone, and then she took a smaller stone called a mano, which fit comfortably in her 2 hands, and she pushed it across the metate, again and again, crushing the corn into a paste. Back and forth, slowly, steadily, patiently. The work was hard, the work was endless. A single woman grinding for her family might spend 4, 5, 6 hours a day on her knees, working the metate. Her arms, over the years, became thick with muscle. Her hands developed calluses that no soap could soften. Her knees became dark and rough from the constant pressure on the earth floor. Her back, over the decades, began to curve. The old women of the empire, the grandmothers, often walked bent slightly forward from the years and years of grinding. It was, perhaps, the single most physically demanding task in Aztec life, and it fell, almost entirely, on the women. The dough that emerged from this grinding was called masa, a soft, slightly damp, slightly granular paste, the colour of the corn that had been used. The woman would shape small portions of this masa between her palms, patting them flat, turning them, patting again, until she had a thin round cake. This cake she would place on a hot clay griddle called a comel, which sat over the small fire in the centre of the house. The cake cooked quickly, a minute on one side, a minute on the other. and then it was done. A warm, fragrant, slightly chewy disc of cooked corn. We would call it, today, a tortilla. The Aztecs called it a tlaxcoli. It was the bread of the empire. It was eaten at every meal. It was the foundation of every life. A common family might eat 10 or 20 tortillas a day between them. The men especially ate many. A man working in the fields, or hauling stone, or paddling a canoe, needed enormous amounts of energy, and the tortilla, simple as it was the engine of that energy. Warm corn, eaten with beans, eaten with chili, eaten with a little salt, was the food that built bodies, that fueled work, that kept the empire moving. But the tortilla was not the only form the corn took. The Aztecs had 100 ways of using their sacred grain. They made tamales, which were small bundles of masa, mixed with beans or vegetables, or sometimes a little meat, wrapped in corn husks, and steamed over a pot of boiling water. The tamales were special. They were the food of festivals. They were the food of gifts. They were the food that families made together, in large batches, when there was something to celebrate. The smell of tamales cooking, the wet smell of corn husks and steam, and a little chili, was the smell of joy in Aztec houses. It is in many regions of Mexico still the smell of joy today. They made a tole, a thick warm drink made from corn dough mixed with water and sometimes flavoured with honey, or chili, or chocolate, or fruit. A tole was the drink of the morning. It was given to babies. It was given to the sick. It was given to nursing mothers. It was given to old men with weak teeth. It was in many ways the comfort food of the empire. Warm, filling, easy to digest, made from the sacred grain. The Aztecs believed that a tole was a gift from the corn goddess herself, who had taught the first women how to make it. They made pinole, a kind of toasted corn flour, mixed with ground chia seeds, or cacao, or chili, which was carried by travellers and warriors and merchants. A small handful of pinole, mixed with water, could keep a man going for hours. The Aztec armies marched for weeks on pinole. The long-distance traders, who walked from Tenochtitlan to the lands of the Maya, carried bags of it on their backs. It was the trail food of the empire, light, compact, energy-dense, sacred. They made tlacoyos, sopis, tetilas, mamilas. Each region had its own specialties, each town, each family almost. The variety of corn foods in the Aztec Empire was, in some ways, like the variety of bread in medieval France, or the variety of rice dishes in old China. A single ingredient, prepared 1,000 different ways by 1,000,000 careful hands. But corn, of course, was not the only thing. Corn was the foundation. Corn was the bread. But the Aztec table held many other treasures. The second great pillar of the diet was beans. The Aztecs called them etl. There were many varieties: black beans, white beans, red beans, spotted beans. Long beans, small beans. Each variety had its own flavour, its own texture, its own preferred way of cooking. The beans were grown in the same fields as the corn, in a clever system the Aztecs had inherited from their ancestors. They planted 3 crops together: corn, beans, squash. This was called in many Native American traditions the 3 sisters. The corn grew tall, providing a pole for the beans to climb. The beans, as they grew, fixed nitrogen in the soil, feeding the corn and the squash. The squash spread along the ground, with its broad leaves shading the earth and keeping it cool and moist, and discouraging weeds. The 3 plants helped each other. They needed each other. Together they produced more food, on less land, with less work, than any of them could have produced alone. The Aztecs did not know about nitrogen fixation, of course. They did not know the science, but they knew the result. They had been planting the 3 sisters together for so long that the wisdom was simply woven into their lives, as natural as breathing. The beans were cooked in clay pots over the fire. They were simmered for hours, with water, with a little salt, with sometimes a few wild herbs, or a small piece of dried chili. The result was a thick, soft, savoury broth, which was eaten with tortillas, scooped up by hand, accompanied by a small bowl of ground chili paste for those who wanted heat. Beans and tortillas, together, were the foundation of every meal. They are still, in much of Mexico, the foundation of many meals today. Then there was the third sister, squash. The Aztecs grew many varieties of squash, large round ones, long thin ones, yellow squashes, green squashes, striped squashes. The flesh was cooked, often steamed, sometimes roasted. The seeds were dried and roasted and ground into pastes, full of oil and protein. The flowers, the bright yellow squash flowers, were picked carefully in the morning and stuffed with cheese or cooked into soups. Nothing was wasted. The leaves were sometimes eaten as greens. The stems were peeled and cooked like vegetables. The whole plant, from root to flower, found its way into the Aztec pot. Now we move to the things that were not the three sisters, to the wider table of the Aztec common people. Chili. The Aztecs called it chili, and from this single word, all of the world's modern words for this fiery little plant have descended. The chili was, in many ways, the soul of Aztec cuisine. It was not just a flavouring, it was a medicine, it was a preservative, it was a religious offering. It was, in some ways, a kind of identity. To be Aztec was to eat chili. To grow up in the empire was to grow up tasting heat. The babies were given, very young, small touches of chili paste on the lips to begin building their tolerance. By the age of 5, an Aztec child could eat chili that would make a grown European weep. The Aztec adults consumed chili at every meal, ground into pastes, mixed into stews, sprinkled on tortillas, added to drinks. Even the chocolate, which we will come to in a moment, was often flavoured with chili. There were many varieties: the pasilla, the anco, the mulatto, the chipotle, which was made by smoking ripe chilies over a fire of fragrant wood, the habanero, small and round and shaped like a tiny lantern, almost unbearably hot, the poblano, large and dark, with a deep smoky flavour. The Aztecs grew dozens of varieties. They knew each one. They knew which chili to use with which dish, which combination would bring out which flavour, which heat level was appropriate for which meal. The art of chili was, in Aztec cooking, an art comparable to the art of wine in old Europe, a connoisseurship, a subtle, careful knowledge passed from mother to daughter, from grandmother to granddaughter, in the slow lessons of the kitchen. And there was tomato. The Aztecs called it sitomatl. The plant was native to this part of the world. It would not reach Europe until after the Spanish conquest, and when it did, it would change Italian cooking, and Spanish cooking, and French cooking forever. But here, in the Empire, the tomato had been a daily food for centuries. It was eaten raw, it was cooked into sauces, it was mixed with chili to make the deep red pastes that flavoured stews. It was dried and stored. It was, along with the chili, the foundation of the Aztec kitchen's colour and flavour. And there was the avocado, the avocatl, soft, buttery, rich. The Aztecs ate avocados constantly. They were a special pleasure. They were also, the Aztecs believed, a great strengthener of the body, and a food associated with love and fertility. The pits were used for medicine. The leaves were used to flavour stews. The flesh was eaten with tortillas, mashed with a little chili and salt, in a preparation we still recognise today. The word guacamole comes directly from the Nahuatl word ahuacamole, which means avocado sauce. There were many other vegetables: sweet potatoes, jicama, a crisp white root, eaten raw, often with chili and lime; chayote, a soft green squash with a tender flesh; nopales, the pads of the cactus, carefully cleaned of their spines, cut into strips and cooked. The cactus, in fact, was a kind of garden in itself. The young pads were eaten as vegetables. The ripe fruits called tunas were eaten as sweet treats. The flowers were eaten. The roots in times of hunger could be cooked and eaten. The cactus gave the people food, year after year, even in the driest of times. There were greens, many greens. The Aztecs ate a wide variety of leafy plants, some of which we know today, and some of which we have forgotten. There was horizontal, there was quintonil, there was verdolagas, what we now call purslane, a small succulent green that grew wild in the fields. There was hierbabuena, the wild mint. There were dozens of other greens, gathered from the edges of fields, from the banks of streams, from the open hillsides. The women and children went out in the early mornings with baskets, and they came back with handfuls of these plants, which would go into the day's pot. And there was amaranth. The Aztecs called it huautli. This was, in some ways, almost as important as corn. Amaranth was a grain, a small, hard, golden seed. It could be ground into flour, like corn, and made into a kind of porridge. It could be popped, like popcorn, into small white puffs. The popped amaranth was mixed with honey and pressed into small cakes, which were eaten as sweets. But amaranth was also, and this is where it became important, a religious food. The Aztecs made statues of their gods out of amaranth dough mixed with honey, and sometimes with human blood. These statues were displayed at festivals. And at the end of the festival, the statues were broken into pieces and distributed to the people, who ate them. Yes, the Aztecs ate the bodies of their gods, in dough form, as a sacred meal, a kind of communion, in some ways very different in form from what would later come from across the sea, but in essence, perhaps, not so different. This practice would horrify the Spanish when they arrived. They would see the amaranth as a kind of blasphemy, a devilish imitation of their own holy communion. And so, after the conquest, they would ban the growing of amaranth. They would burn the fields, they would punish the families who continued to plant it, and amaranth, which had fed the empire for centuries, which was perhaps the most nutritious grain in all of Mesoamerica, almost disappeared. It survived only in a few remote villages, where the old women kept the seeds hidden, generation after generation, waiting for a time when their grandchildren might plant it again. That time, in fact, has come. Today, amaranth is being rediscovered, studied, planted again, but in the years after the conquest, the loss was almost total. The empire's gift to the world nearly extinguished. Let us return, though, to the food of the common people, to what they ate in the years before the Spanish came.